She was drowning at a table set for two. Emma Bennett had spent 3 years learning how to disappear, how to shrink her voice, dim her smile, and apologize for existing. Her fiancé Daniel Carter had turned love into a slow erosion, each cutting word another brick in the wall that trapped her. But tonight, beneath the crystal chandeliers of Aurelius, everything would shatter. A stranger's dark eyes watched from across the room. Adrian Russo didn't save broken things. He recognized them. And when Daniel's cruelty finally crossed a line, Adrian would offer Emma a choice that would destroy her carefully constructed prison. Like and comment your city so I can see how far this story reaches. The champagne bubbles rose like tiny desperate breaths, and Emma watched them pop against the surface of her glass with the kind of focused attention that came from needing somewhere, anywhere, to look besides across the table. Are you even listening to me? Daniel's voice cut through the ambient music and polite conversation that filled Aurelius, the kind of restaurant where reservations required a month's notice and the prix-fixe menu cost more than Emma's weekly grocery budget. She looked up, forcing her expression into something she hoped resembled attentiveness, rather than the bone-deep exhaustion that had become her constant companion. "Of course," she said softly. "You were talking about the Henderson account." "No." Daniel set down his fork with deliberate precision, the small clink of silver against china somehow louder than it should have been. "I was talking about your job, again. But clearly, you'd rather stare into space than participate in a conversation about our future." Our future. The words should have felt warm, inclusive. Instead, they landed like an anchor. Emma straightened in her chair, her fingers tightening around the stem of her champagne flute. "I'm sorry, I'm listening now." Daniel's jaw worked for a moment before he continued, his voice dropping to that particular tone he used when he wanted to seem reasonable while saying something entirely unreasonable. "As I was saying, it doesn't make sense for you to keep working at that nonprofit. The hours are terrible, the pay is insulting, and frankly, it's becoming an embarrassment." "An embarrassment?" The words slipped out before Emma could stop them, carrying an edge of something that might have been defiance if she'd had any left to spare. "Emma." Daniel leaned forward, and she recognized the expression, the one that said he was being patient with a child who refused to understand simple logic. "We're getting married in 6 months. I'm making senior partner at Whitmore & Associates. We'll be attending events, hosting dinners. People will ask what my wife does, and I'll have to tell them she works for some struggling community center in a neighborhood most of them wouldn't drive through. The community center where she'd spent the last 4 years building programs for at-risk youth. The place where she actually made a difference, where children knew her name and trusted her to show up. Where she still remembered what it felt like to matter." "It's not struggling," Emma said quietly. "We just secured a grant that will—" "I don't care about the grant." Daniel's voice remained level, but his eyes had gone cold. "I care about the optics. I care about building a life that reflects the success we're achieving, that I'm achieving." The slip was so casual, so automatic, that Emma wondered if he even noticed it anymore. "I'm achieving. Not we. Not us. Just him, and she was simply expected to arrange herself attractively in the background of his accomplishments. "I love my job," she said, hating how small her voice sounded. "It's important to me." "More important than us?" Daniel's expression shifted into something practiced, the kind of hurt that was really just manipulation wearing a mask. "More important than our marriage?" And there it was, the impossible equation he'd been crafting for months. Her value versus their relationship. Her needs versus his comfort. The slow, steady demand that she make herself smaller so he could appear larger. "That's not fair," Emma whispered. "What's not fair is having to explain to my colleagues why my fiancé insists on working for pennies when she doesn't need to work at all." Daniel reached across the table, his hand covering hers in a gesture that probably looked tender to anyone watching. His fingers were cold. "I'm trying to take care of you, Em. Why is that so hard for you to accept?" "Because taking care of someone was supposed to feel like shelter, not suffocation. Because love wasn't meant to be a slow dismantling of everything that made you yourself. Because 3 years ago, when they'd met at a fundraiser where she'd been volunteering and he'd been networking, he'd said her passion for helping others was beautiful. Now he called it an embarrassment. But Emma didn't say any of that. She'd learned that trying to explain only led to longer arguments, twisted logic that left her questioning her own sanity, and eventually tears that Daniel would dismiss as emotional manipulation. So instead, she said, "I'll think about it." "You've been thinking about it for 6 months." Daniel's hand tightened on hers. "At some point, you need to make a decision. Choose the life we're building together, or keep clinging to this fantasy that you're going to save the world one troubled kid at a time." The dismissal in his tone made her chest ache. Those troubled kids had names. Marcus, who'd stopped cutting himself after their art therapy sessions. Sophia, who'd gotten into college with Emma's help navigating the application process. James, who called her his safe person and had started smiling again after 2 years of silence. "They're not troubled," Emma said quietly. "They're surviving. And that's very noble of you to care." Daniel's smile didn't reach his eyes. "But nobility doesn't pay for the lifestyle we're going to have. Nobility doesn't look good at the partner's dinner next month. Nobility doesn't reflect well on you?" Emma finished, the words emerging with more sharpness than she'd intended. The temperature at their table dropped several degrees. "Careful," Daniel said softly. "You're starting to sound ungrateful. Do you know how many women would kill to be in your position? To have someone willing to provide for them, to give them a comfortable life, to ask nothing more than that they show a little appreciation? Ask nothing more." The phrase was so absurd it almost made her laugh. Nothing more except that she quit her job. Nothing more except that she stopped seeing certain friends Daniel deemed negative influences. Nothing more except that she changed how she dressed, how she spoke, how she existed in spaces that were supposed to be his to dominate. Nothing more except that she'd disappear entirely. "I am grateful," Emma said, "because it was easier than fighting. Because she was tired. Because somewhere over the past 3 years she'd forgotten how to fight at all." "Then show it." Daniel released her hand and picked up his fork again. "Resign from the nonprofit. Focus on planning the wedding. Start acting like the future Mrs. Daniel Carter instead of some bleeding heart volunteer who can't let go of her poverty complex." Poverty complex. As if growing up with a single mother who'd worked 3 jobs to keep them housed was something shameful. As if understanding struggle made her weak rather than empathetic. Emma looked down at her plate, some architectural arrangement of microgreens and protein that probably had a French name she couldn't pronounce. She'd lost her appetite an hour ago, somewhere between Daniel critiquing her choice of wine and suggesting her dress was trying too hard. "I need to use the restroom," she said, already pushing back her chair. "We're not done talking about this." "I just need a moment." Daniel's expression suggested he was filing this away. Another item on his list of Emma's inadequacies to be reviewed later. "Fine, but don't take forever. We have dessert coming, and I don't want the souffle to fall while you're touching up makeup you didn't need to wear so heavily in the first place." The criticism was so casual, so automatic, that Emma almost didn't react. Almost. But something in her chest cracked just a little wider, the fissure that had been spreading for months now threatening to split her completely open. She walked away from the table with her head down, navigating between tables filled with couples who looked happy, families who laughed, groups of friends who seemed to actually enjoy each other's company. The bathroom was blessedly empty, all marble and soft lighting and the kind of quiet that felt like absolution. Emma gripped the edge of the sink and stared at her reflection. When had she started looking so tired? The woman in the mirror had dark circles poorly concealed by expensive concealer Daniel had bought her after suggesting she looked exhausted too often to be attractive. Her dress, the one he'd said was trying too hard, was actually conservative by anyone's standards, but Daniel preferred her in colors that didn't draw attention, preferred her quiet, preferred her small. "You're being diminished," a voice in her head whispered. "Every day, a little more of you disappears." Emma closed her eyes, but that made it worse, because then she could see it clearly. The trajectory of their relationship like a graph trending steadily downward. The early days when Daniel had seemed charmed by her work, her passion, her softness. The slow shift as his charm revealed itself as control. The way he'd isolated her so gradually she hadn't noticed until her phone rarely rang with anything except his calls. The casual cruelties that had escalated from suggestions to criticisms to demands. The ring on her finger, 2 carats in a platinum setting that Daniel had chosen without her input, felt suddenly heavy. When did I agree to this? The thought arrived with startling clarity. When did I say yes to this version of forever? She'd said yes to the proposal because he'd done it publicly, at a charity gala with hundreds watching, and saying no would have caused a scene. She'd said yes to moving in together because her lease was ending and it seemed practical. She'd said yes to 1,000 small concessions that had added up to the complete erasure of her own wants, needs, and identity. She'd said yes to everything except her own happiness. The bathroom door opened, making Emma jump. She quickly turned on the faucet, pretending to wash her hands as another woman entered, offered a polite smile, and disappeared into a stall. Emma dried her hands with deliberate slowness, buying herself a few more moments of peace before she had to return to that table. To Daniel's criticisms disguised as concern, to the slow suffocation of a life she'd never actually chosen. The hallway back to the dining room was long and dimly lit, lined with abstract art that probably cost more than Emma's annual salary. She walked slowly, dreading her return, when a voice stopped her. "Excuse me." Emma turned to find a man standing a few feet away, partially shadowed by the alcove that led to the private dining rooms. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to assess everything in a single glance. His suit was impeccably tailored, the kind of expensive that didn't need logos to announce its worth. But it wasn't his appearance that made Emma's breath catch. It was the way he looked at her. Not through her, not past her, but directly at her, as if she were actually visible. "I'm sorry," the man said, his voice carrying an accent Emma couldn't quite place. Something European, refined. "I didn't mean to startle you." "You didn't," Emma lied, because being startled required being present in your body, and she'd spent the last hour trying to disconnect from hers entirely. The man studied her for a moment, and Emma had the unsettling sensation of being seen in a way she hadn't experienced in years. Not evaluated, Daniel evaluated her constantly, finding her lacking in 1,000 small ways. This was different. This was recognition. "Are you all right?" he asked. The question was simple, straightforward, so why did it make Emma's throat tight? "I'm fine," she said automatically. "Thank you." "Forgive me, but you don't look fine." He took a step closer, and Emma noticed details she'd missed, the slight scar above his left eyebrow, the calluses on his hands that suggested he did more than sign papers, the way he carried himself with absolute certainty. "You look like someone who's drowning in shallow water." The observation was so accurate, so precisely stated, that Emma actually laughed, a small broken sound. "That's a poetic way to describe dinner with your fiancé." "Ah." Understanding flickered in the man's dark eyes. "The gentleman at table 12, I noticed him earlier." "Of course you did." Daniel's hard to miss. Emma didn't know why she was still talking to this stranger, didn't know why his presence felt simultaneously dangerous and safe. He has a way of commanding attention. "That's not why I noticed him." The man's expression remained neutral, but something harder entered his voice. "I noticed him because of the way he speaks to you, the way you make yourself smaller every time he opens his mouth." Emma's face flushed. "You were watching us." "I was dining alone and happened to observe." He paused. "I apologize if that makes you uncomfortable, but I've seen enough diminishment in my life to recognize it in others." Diminishment. The word landed like a verdict, and Emma felt something crack further inside her chest. "You don't know anything about me," she said, but the protest was weak. "You're right, I don't." The man's gaze held hers. "But I know what it looks like when someone is being systematically erased. When their voice is taken, their choices are dismissed, and their worth is measured only by how well they conform to someone else's expectations." Emma's hands were shaking. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because no one else will." His voice gentled slightly. "Because you look like you've forgotten that you have a choice, that you can say no, that drowning in shallow water is ridiculous when you're perfectly capable of standing up." The words hit Emma like a physical blow. Not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Because she'd been drowning in water barely deep enough to cover her ankles, convinced she had no choice but to keep her head under. "I should get back," Emma whispered. "Daniel will be waiting." "Of course." The man stepped aside, giving her clear passage. "But before you go, allow me to introduce myself. Adrian Russo." He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Emma took it. His grip was firm, warm, and somehow steadying. Emma Bennett. Emma. Adrian didn't release her hand immediately. When you're ready to stand up, the water won't seem nearly as deep as you think. Then he let go, stepping back into the shadows of the alcove, and Emma continued down the hallway on legs that felt unsteady. Her mind was racing, Adrian's words echoing in her head with the persistence of truth she'd been trying to ignore. You're being diminished. You have a choice. Stand up. When she reached the table, Daniel was on his phone, texting with the kind of focused irritation that meant work was interfering with his personal time. He didn't look up as Emma sat down. You were gone for 12 minutes, he said, eyes still on his screen. I was about to send someone to check on you. I'm sorry. There was a line. The lie came automatically, another small dishonesty in the architecture of their relationship. Daniel finally looked up, his gaze sweeping over her face. You look flushed. Are you feeling all right? I told you that dress was too tight. You're probably cutting off your circulation. Before Adrian's words, before that moment of recognition in the hallway, Emma would have apologized, would have made some excuse about the lighting or her makeup or anything to deflect Daniel's criticism, but something had shifted. The dress is fine, Emma said quietly. I'm fine. Daniel's eyebrows rose slightly. Well, that's a change. Usually you're full of apologies and explanations. What happened in the bathroom? Did you finally take something for that anxiety you refuse to acknowledge? I don't have anxiety, Daniel. I have a fiancé who criticizes everything I do. The words emerged before Emma could stop them, clear and sharp and absolutely true. She watched Daniel's expression shift from surprise to calculation to carefully controlled anger. Excuse me? His voice was very quiet. Would you like to repeat that? Emma's heart was pounding, but for the first time in months, it wasn't from fear. It was from something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. You heard me. She met his eyes. You spent this entire dinner telling me everything that's wrong with me. My job is an embarrassment. My dress is trying too hard. My makeup is too heavy. My career is a poverty complex. At what point, Daniel, do I get to just exist without needing to apologize for it? Daniel set down his phone with deliberate care. You're causing a scene. I'm having a conversation. You're the one who's worried about appearances. Emma, his voice carried a warning. I don't know what's gotten into you, but this isn't the time or place. Then when is? The question burst out of her. When is the right time to tell you that I'm tired of being criticized, that I'm tired of feeling like nothing I do is good enough, that I don't want to quit my job just because it doesn't fit your image of the perfect corporate wife? Lower your voice. Daniel's jaw was tight. People are staring. Let them stare. Emma was shaking now, but she couldn't stop. 3 years of swallowed words were trying to escape all at once. I'm not quitting my job. I'm not going to stop doing work that matters just because it makes you uncomfortable. And I'm definitely not going to keep shrinking myself to fit into the space you've decided I'm allowed to occupy. Daniel's expression went cold. Are you finished with this little tantrum? Tantrum? Emma stared at him. Is that what you call it when I finally tell you the truth? I call it an emotional outburst that's completely inappropriate for a public setting. Daniel's voice was ice. And frankly, it proves my point about you needing to get your emotions under control. This is exactly the kind of behavior that would be humiliating at a partner's dinner. The words should have landed, should have made Emma doubt herself, question her reaction, apologize for being too much, too loud, too emotional. But Adrian's voice was still in her head. You're being diminished. You have a choice. Maybe, Emma said slowly, the problem isn't that I'm too emotional. Maybe the problem is that you've spent 3 years telling me my emotions don't matter. Daniel went very still. Be very careful about what you say next. Or what? The question emerged with surprising steadiness. You'll criticize me more? Suggest I'm being irrational? Tell me I'm ungrateful for not appreciating how you're trying to mold me into someone you find acceptable? I have tried, Daniel said, each word precise and cutting, to help you become the best version of yourself, to elevate you, to give you opportunities you never would have had otherwise. And this is how you repay me? By throwing a fit in the middle of Aurelius because you can't handle a simple discussion about our future? A simple discussion? Emma's voice rose despite herself. You told me to quit my job. You said my career is an embarrassment and my clothes are wrong and my makeup is too heavy and because you need guidance. Daniel's control cracked just slightly. Left to your own devices, you'd still be living in that studio apartment, working yourself to death for children who don't even appreciate you, wearing clearance rack clothes and wondering why your life never changes. The contempt in his voice was so naked, so undisguised, that Emma actually recoiled. Is that really what you think of me? She whispered. That I'm some project that needs fixing? Daniel's silence was answer enough. Emma stood up, her napkin falling forgotten to the floor. Her legs were unsteady, but she was standing. She was finally standing. Where are you going? Daniel demanded. Sit down. We're not done here. Yes, Emma said quietly. We are. She turned and walked away from the table, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall until she was somewhere private. Behind her, she heard Daniel call her name, not concerned but commanding, the tone he'd use with a disobedient employee. She didn't stop. Emma made it to the restaurant's entrance before the full weight of what she'd done hit her. She just walked away from Daniel, in public, in front of dozens of witnesses. He would never forgive this. He would turn it into a story about her instability, her emotional fragility, her inability to handle adult conversations. He would make her the villain in a narrative where she'd only tried to stop drowning. Emma! She spun around, expecting Daniel, but found Adrian instead. He'd appeared from somewhere near the bar, moving with the kind of controlled purpose that suggested he'd been waiting. You were watching again, Sukun, Emma said, swiping at her eyes. I was. No apology, just acknowledgement. Are you all right? I don't know. Emma's laugh was watery. I don't know what I just did. You stood up. Adrian's expression was unreadable. The water wasn't as deep as you thought. Before Emma could respond, Daniel's voice cut through the restaurant's ambient noise. Emma, get back here, now! She turned to see her fiancé striding toward them, his face dark with barely controlled rage. Other diners were watching now, the spectacle too interesting to ignore. We need to leave, Daniel said when he reached them, his hand closing around Emma's arm. You've embarrassed yourself enough for one evening. Let go of me. Emma tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. Not until you come to your senses and the lady asked you to let go. Adrian's voice was quiet, but it carried an edge that made Daniel's head snap toward him. This is none of your business, Daniel said, his tone sharp. This is between me and my fiancé. And yet you're hurting her. Adrian's gaze dropped to where Daniel's fingers were pressing white marks into Emma's skin. Remove your hand. Or what? Daniel's smile was ugly. You'll make me? Do you have any idea who I am? I don't particularly care. Adrian took a step closer, and Emma noticed he was slightly taller than Daniel, broader across the shoulders. Release her, now. For a long moment, Daniel didn't move. Then something shifted in his expression, a calculation, probably weighing the scene against his reputation, and he let go of Emma's arm. Fine. Daniel's voice dripped with false courtesy. Emma, darling, I think we should continue this conversation outside, away from interruptions. The way he said darling made Emma's skin crawl. It was a performance, a show for the watching crowd, and she could see the fury simmering beneath his controlled exterior. I'm not going anywhere with you, Emma said. Don't be ridiculous. We came together. We'll leave together. Daniel reached for her again. Touch her again, Adrian said softly, and you'll regret it. The threat hung in the air between them, and Emma saw something flicker in Daniel's eyes. Uncertainty, maybe, or the first hint of actual fear. This is insane. Daniel turned his attention back to Emma, trying a different tactic. Em, please. Let's just go home and talk about this calmly. You're upset, I get it. We both said things we didn't mean. Let's not make this worse. The manipulation was so familiar, so perfectly executed that Emma almost believed it, almost heard the apology hidden between the lines, almost convinced herself that she was overreacting, being too sensitive, causing drama where none needed to exist. Almost. I meant every word I said, Emma told him, and I'm not going home with you. Then where exactly do you plan to go? Daniel's mask cracked further. That apartment is mine. The car you drove here is mine. The credit cards in your wallet, mine. You want to throw a tantrum and walk away? Fine. But you'll be walking away with nothing. The words were meant to terrify her, to remind her of her dependence, to force her back into line. And they might have worked if Emma hadn't already drowned once tonight and discovered she could still breathe. Then I'll have nothing, she said. That's still better than this. Daniel's face went scarlet. You ungrateful! Enough! Adrian moved between them, his presence a wall. The lady has made her choice clear. I suggest you respect it and leave. I suggest you mind your own goddamn business before you what? Adrian's voice remained calm, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. Make another scene? 'Cause more people to witness how you speak to women who displease you? By all means, continue. I'm fascinated to see how this ends for you. The restaurant had gone almost silent, dozens of eyes fixed on the confrontation. Emma could see Daniel processing this, calculating the damage, weighing his options. This isn't over, he said finally, directing the words at Emma. Not by a long shot. You walk out of here with this stranger, and you'll regret it. I'll make sure of that. Then he turned and stalked toward the exit, his exit more flight than the dignified departure he'd probably intended. Emma realized she'd been holding her breath. She released it shakily, her entire body trembling with adrenaline and fear and something that might have been relief. Are you all right? Adrian asked quietly. I don't know. Emma's voice came out small. I have nowhere to go. He's right about that. The apartment, the car, everything. It's all his. Do you want it back? Adrian's question was gentle but direct. If you go after him now, apologize. You could probably smooth this over. Return to the life you had. Emma thought about it. Really thought about it. Pictured herself chasing Daniel down, offering the apologies he'd expect, accepting his forgiveness as if she were the one who'd done something wrong. Returning to that apartment, that life, that slow erasure of everything she was. No, she whispered. I can't go back to that. Then you won't. Adrian pulled out his phone, typed something quickly. I have a car outside. I can take you somewhere safe while you figure out your next step. I don't even know you. Emma's logical mind was finally catching up to her racing heart. You could be anyone. I could be. Adrian's slight smile held no humor. But right now, I'm someone offering you a choice. Take it or don't. But make the decision yourself, without his voice in your head telling you what you should do. Emma looked toward the exit where Daniel had disappeared. Then at the restaurant full of strangers who'd witnessed her humiliation. Then at Adrian, this man who'd appeared out of nowhere and somehow catalyzed the complete destruction of her carefully maintained life. Stand up, his voice echoed in her memory. The water isn't as deep as you think. She'd stood up. She'd walked away. She'd chosen herself for the first time in 3 years, but choosing herself once and building an entire life around that choice were two very different things. If I get in your car, Emma said slowly, where would we go? Somewhere you can breathe, Adrian replied. Somewhere you can think without his voice drowning out your own. Somewhere you can decide what happens next without anyone, including me, telling you what to do. It was a massive risk, a leap into complete unknown. Emma had no idea who Adrian Russo was, what he wanted, or why he seemed invested in her liberation. But she knew exactly who Daniel Carter was, knew what he wanted, knew that returning to him meant accepting a future where she grew smaller and smaller until she vanished entirely. Okay, Emma heard herself say. Let's go. Adrian nodded once and gestured toward the door. As they walked through the restaurant together, Emma felt dozens of eyes on her, judgment, curiosity, speculation about the woman who'd caused such a scene. Let them speculate. Let them judge. For the first time in years, Emma was making a choice that was entirely her own. The night air hit her face as they stepped outside, cool and sharp and real. A sleek black car waited at the curb, and Adrian opened the door for her with old-fashioned courtesy that somehow didn't feel patronizing. Emma slid into the leather seat, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. This was insane. This was reckless. This was possibly the worst decision she'd ever made. Or possibly the best. Adrian settled into the seat beside her and gave quiet instructions to the driver. As the car pulled away from Aurelius, Emma looked back through the rear window and saw Daniel standing on the sidewalk, his phone pressed to his ear, his face twisted with rage. She was really doing this, really leaving, really choosing the unknown over the known misery. "Are you afraid?" Adrian asked, watching her. Emma considered the question. "Terrified." "Good." His slight smile held approval. Fear means you're alive, means you're feeling something besides the numbness that comes from being slowly erased. "How do you know about that?" Emma turned to face him fully. "About being erased?" "Because I've seen it happen to people I cared about." Adrian's expression shuddered slightly. "And because I've done it to people myself, in the past, before I understood what power actually meant." The admission was startling in its honesty. "And what does power actually mean?" "The ability to choose." Adrian held her gaze. "Not just for yourself, but in how you allow others to exist around you. Your fiancé, former fiancé, he used his power to diminish you, to make you smaller so he could feel larger. And you?" Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "How do you use your power?" Adrian was quiet for a long moment. "I'm still figuring that out," he said finally. "But I know I don't want to use it to break people. Not anymore." The car moved through Chicago's streets, leaving the restaurant and Daniel and Emma's entire previous life behind with each passing block. She should have been panicking, should have been second-guessing, should have been doing all the rational things that rational people did when they made impulsive decisions that upended their entire existence. Instead, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt free. The penthouse overlooked the city like a throne surveying its kingdom. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed Chicago spread out in glittering darkness, a constellation of lights that seemed to stretch forever. Emma stood at the glass, her reflection ghostly against the nightscape, and tried to process the fact that she was here, in a stranger's home, having abandoned her entire life on what amounted to pure instinct. "You should eat something," Adrian said from somewhere behind her. "You barely touched dinner." Emma turned to find him in the open kitchen, moving with the efficiency of someone who actually knew his way around the space. He'd removed his jacket and rolled up his shirt sleeves, revealing forearms marked with scars that suggested a history more complicated than boardrooms and business deals. "I'm not hungry," she said, which was true. Her stomach was too knotted with anxiety and adrenaline to accept food. "You're in shock." Adrian pulled items from the refrigerator without looking at her. "Your body thinks it's in crisis mode, but you need to eat anyway, or you'll crash in an hour and make decisions from a place of depletion." The casual authority in his voice should have irritated her. Emma had spent 3 years with a man who told her what to do at every turn. But there was a difference between Daniel's controlling demands and Adrian's practical observation. One sought to diminish, the other simply stated facts. "How do you know I'm in shock?" Emma asked. "Because you're still standing very straight, your hands aren't shaking anymore, and you're speaking in complete sentences." Adrian set a block of cheese and some bread on the counter. "You're holding yourself together through force of will, but adrenaline doesn't last forever." He was right, of course. Emma could feel the artificial steadiness beginning to crack at the edges, her body's emergency protocols starting to fail as the immediate danger passed. Soon she'd have to actually feel everything she'd just done. "I left him," she said quietly. "I really left him." "You did." Adrian sliced the bread with precise movements. "How does that feel?" Emma laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. "Terrifying, liberating, insane. Like I just jumped out of a plane without checking if I was wearing a parachute." "But you jumped." Adrian looked up, his dark eyes holding hers. "That's what matters." "Is it?" Emma moved away from the window, drawn toward the kitchen island despite herself. "Because right now it feels like I just destroyed my entire life, based on a conversation with a stranger who might be—" She stopped, suddenly aware of how alone she was, how vulnerable. "I don't even know what you might be." Adrian set down the knife. "What do you think I am?" "I think you're someone who is dining alone at Aurelius on a Wednesday night, which means you have money. I think you noticed Daniel treating me badly and decided to intervene, which means you have either a hero complex or an agenda. And I think you brought me here with promises of safety and choice, which could be genuine or could be the setup for something much worse. The analysis spilled out clinically, her mind finally catching up to her heart's impulsive decision. Adrian listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. "All fair observations," he said when she finished, "and all things you should be questioning. The fact that you are suggests you're not as broken as your fiancé tried to make you believe." "Former fiancé," Emma corrected automatically, then realized what she'd done, claimed the separation as real, made it permanent with grammar. "Former fiancé," Adrian agreed. "As for what I am, yes, I have money. Yes, I intervened because I recognized a pattern I've seen too many times. And yes, I brought you here because you needed somewhere safe to land while you figured out your next move." He paused. "But I understand your fear. You don't know me. For all you know, I could be worse than Daniel." "Are you?" The question emerged as barely a whisper. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his gaze steady on hers. "I'm not a good man, Emma. I've done things that would probably terrify you if you knew the details. I operate in spaces where the rules are different, where power is currency and weakness gets you killed." He pushed the plate of bread and cheese toward her. "But I don't prey on vulnerable women. I don't diminish people to make myself feel larger. And I meant what I said. I'm trying to figure out what power actually means when you're not using it to destroy." The honesty was startling. Most men in Emma's experience, especially Daniel, would have rushed to reassure her, to paint themselves as heroes, to manipulate her fear into trust. Adrian just stated facts and let her draw her own conclusions. "What do you do?" Emma asked. "For a living, I mean." "I solve problems." Adrian's slight smile held no warmth. "Usually for people who can't solve them through legal channels." "So you're a criminal." "I operate in gray areas." He didn't flinch from the accusation. "Sometimes that means skirting the law. Sometimes it means breaking it entirely. But I have rules, and I don't hurt people who don't deserve it." Emma should have been horrified. Should have been heading for the door. Should have been calling the police, or at least demanding he take her somewhere, anywhere else. Instead, she picked up a piece of bread and ate it. "You're taking this remarkably well," Adrian observed. "I'm too tired to panic properly." Emma took another bite, her body recognizing the food even as her mind spun. "And honestly, after 3 years with Daniel, a morally gray problem solver feels almost refreshing in his honesty." "That's a low bar. You have no idea how low." Emma settled onto one of the bar stools, her legs suddenly unsteady. "He spent 3 years convincing me that everything wrong in our relationship was my fault. That I was too emotional, too sensitive, too ungrateful for the life he was giving me. That I needed to be fixed." "And you believed him?" "Eventually." The admission hurt. It happens gradually, you know? One criticism at a time, one boundary crossed, one friend too negative to keep seeing. By the time I realized what was happening, I'd already lost so much of myself that I didn't know how to get it back. Adrian poured 2 glasses of water, sliding one across to her. "But you got it back tonight." "Did I?" Emma wrapped her hands around the glass. "Or did I just trade one dangerous situation for another?" "That depends on what you do next." Adrian leaned against the counter, his posture relaxed but his attention focused entirely on her. "You can stay here tonight, sleep in the guest room, and tomorrow I'll help you get to wherever you want to go. No strings, no expectations. Or you can leave right now, and I'll have my driver take you anywhere in the city." "Just like that?" "Just like that." Adrian's expression remained neutral. "This only works if you're choosing it. If you stay because you want to. Not because you're afraid to leave, or because you think you owe me something. The second you feel trapped here, you become another person I've diminished. And I meant what I said. I'm trying not to do that anymore." Emma studied him, trying to reconcile the man who'd threatened Daniel with the one now offering her complete freedom. "Why do you care what happens to me?" "Honestly?" Adrian's gaze went distant for a moment. "Because I watched someone I cared about disappear the way you were disappearing. Watched her shrink and fade until there was nothing left but an echo of who she'd been. And I didn't stop it. Didn't even realize it was happening until it was too late." "What happened to her?" "She's gone." The words were flat, final. "And I learned too late that power without awareness is just another form of violence." The grief in his voice was real, Emma realized. Whatever had happened, Whoever he'd lost, it had fundamentally changed him. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Don't be sorry, just don't let yourself disappear." Adrian straightened, the moment of vulnerability passing. "Stay or go, Emma, but make the choice yours." Emma looked around the penthouse, at the expensive furniture and original art, at the view that probably cost more per month than she made in a year, at this strange sanctuary that had materialized out of nowhere. Then she thought about her alternatives. She could call a friend, except she'd lost most of them to Daniel's slow isolation. She could go to a hotel, except her credit cards were all tied to accounts Daniel controlled. She could try to return to the apartment, except the thought of facing him made her feel sick. Or she could stay here, in this admittedly risky but strangely honest space, and figure out her next move from a position that wasn't complete desperation. "I'll stay," Emma said finally. "Just for tonight." Adrian nodded once, accepting her decision without ceremony. "The guest room is down that hall, second door on the left. There are clothes in the closet that should fit reasonably well. I keep them for visitors." The slight hesitation made Emma wonder what kind of visitors, but she didn't ask. It wasn't her business, and frankly, she had enough to process without adding jealousy over a stranger's personal life to the mix. "Thank you," she said instead. "Don't thank me yet." Adrian's expression was unreadable. "Tomorrow the reality of what you've done is going to hit. Your former fiancé is going to retaliate. You're going to doubt yourself, wonder if you made the right choice, maybe even consider going back. That's when it gets hard." "You sound like you've seen this before." "I have." Adrian's voice carried a weight that spoke of experience. Freedom is terrifying when you're not used to it. It's easier to return to the cage than learn to fly. Emma wanted to argue, to insist she'd never go back to Daniel, that tonight's decision was permanent, but Adrian was right. She could already feel the doubt creeping in, the familiar voice in her head suggesting she'd overreacted, been too dramatic, thrown away something good because she couldn't handle a simple disagreement. What if I can't do it? The question emerged smaller than she intended. What if I'm not strong enough? Then you're not. Adrian's bluntness was almost shocking. Strength isn't something you either have or don't have, Emma. It's a choice you make every single day, sometimes every single hour. And some days you'll fail. You'll want to go back, take the easy path, accept the cage because at least it's familiar. That's not very encouraging. I'm not here to encourage you. Adrian moved around the counter, stopping a few feet away. I'm here to tell you the truth. And the truth is that leaving is the easy part. Staying gone, building a life where you choose yourself every day, that's the hard part. That's the part where most people fail. Emma's eyes stung with sudden tears. Then why did you help me leave? Because even if you go back, even if you fail, you'll know you tried. You'll know there was a moment when you stood up, when you chose yourself, when you were brave enough to jump. Adrian's voice gentled slightly. And maybe that knowledge will save you later. Or maybe it'll save someone else who's drowning in shallow water. The tears spilled over, and Emma didn't try to stop them. She cried for the life she'd lost, not the one with Daniel, but the one before him, when she'd been whole and confident and unafraid. She cried for the woman she'd become, small and apologetic, and convinced she deserved nothing better. And she cried for the terrifying unknown stretching ahead, all the choices she'd have to make without anyone telling her what to do. Adrian didn't try to comfort her or tell her everything would be okay. He simply handed her a box of tissues and waited, giving her space to break apart in a way Daniel never had. When the crying finally subsided, Emma felt hollowed out, but somehow clearer. I should sleep, she said, her voice rough. You should. Adrian gestured toward the hallway. Everything you need is in the guest room. And Emma? He waited until she looked at him. Lock the door if it makes you feel safer. The offer was so unexpected, so contrary to everything she'd feared that Emma almost started crying again. Instead, she just nodded and made her way down the hallway. The guest room was simple but elegant, decorated in cool grays and whites that felt soothing after the emotional chaos of the evening. Emma found the promised clothes in the closet, expensive casual wear in various sizes, suggesting Adrian kept them for exactly this kind of situation. She wondered how many other women had stood in this room, fleeing from situations they could no longer endure. She changed into soft pajama pants and a t-shirt, washed her face in the ensuite bathroom, and stared at her reflection. Without makeup, without the armor she'd learned to wear, she looked young and lost and frightened. But she also looked free. Emma climbed into bed, half expecting to lie awake for hours processing everything. Instead, exhaustion claimed her almost immediately, dragging her into sleep that was mercifully dreamless. She woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and a moment of complete disorientation. For several seconds, she couldn't remember where she was or how she'd gotten there. Then it all came rushing back. The restaurant, the confrontation, Adrian's intervention, the choice she'd made to leave everything behind. Emma's phone, which she'd silenced after leaving Aurelius, showed 47 missed calls and 63 text messages, all from Daniel. She didn't read them, didn't need to. She could imagine the progression: anger, then demands, then threats, then manipulation disguised as concern, then more threats. The pattern was predictable because she'd seen it before, in smaller conflicts that had ended with her apologizing and accepting blame. Not this time. Emma deleted the notifications without reading them and got out of bed. The smell of coffee drew her toward the kitchen, where she found Adrian already awake, dressed in dark jeans and a simple black shirt, reading something on his tablet. "Good morning," he said without looking up. "Coffee's fresh. There's food if you're hungry." "Thank you." Emma poured herself a cup, grateful for something to do with her hands. "Did you sleep?" "Some." Adrian finally glanced at her. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop." Emma settled onto a bar stool. "Daniel's called 47 times. And you didn't answer." "No." Emma stared into her coffee. "Should I be worried about what he might do?" "What do you think he'll do?" Adrian set down his tablet, giving her his full attention. Emma considered the question. "He'll try to get me fired from my job. He knows people on the nonprofit's board. He made sure to connect with them at fundraisers, said it was networking, but really it was about establishing control." The realization made her feel sick. "He'll tell everyone I had a breakdown, that I'm unstable, that I need help. He'll make himself the victim and me the crazy woman who ruined a perfectly good relationship." "Probably." Adrian's agreement was matter-of-fact. "What else?" "He'll freeze me out of our bank accounts, cancel the credit cards, make sure I can't access any of the money I thought was ours, but was really always his." Emma's hands tightened around her mug. "He'll make it as hard as possible for me to survive without him." "Also likely." Adrian watched her process this. "Anything else?" "He'll—" Emma stopped, a chill running through her. "He might try to find me, to convince me to come back, or at least to have the last word. Daniel doesn't handle rejection well." "No, men like him rarely do." Adrian's expression hardened slightly. "Which is why you're going to need a plan. Not just for today, but for the next few weeks while you rebuild." "I don't even know where to start." Emma felt the weight of it crushing down. "I have no money, no place to live, a job that pays barely enough to cover rent on a studio apartment, and an ex-fiancé who's going to do everything in his power to destroy me." "Then let's make a list." Adrian pulled a notepad from a drawer, his movements efficient. "First priority, safety, where he can't find you, hurt you, or manipulate you back into his control." "I can't stay here," Emma said quickly. "I appreciate what you've done, but I can't be dependent on another man. That's how I got into this mess in the first place." "Fair point." Adrian didn't look offended. "But you can stay here temporarily while you figure out a more permanent solution. Give yourself a week to get your bearings, access resources, and make decisions from a place of stability rather than panic." "A week?" Emma's voice rose. "That's too much. I can't impose." "You're not imposing. I'm offering." Adrian's tone remained calm. "And before you argue about charity or dependence, consider this. Every day you spend scrambling to survive is a day Daniel can exploit your vulnerability. Every decision you make from desperation is one he can use against you. But if you give yourself a week to breathe, to plan, to rebuild from a position of relative safety, you're much more likely to build something sustainable." The logic was sound, even if it terrified her. "And what do you get out of this?" Adrian was quiet for a moment. "The knowledge that I helped someone break a cycle I failed to break before." The honesty in his voice made Emma's chest tight. "This woman you lost, was she someone you loved?" "She was someone I should have protected. Adrian's expression shuddered. And I didn't. I was too focused on building an empire to notice she was disappearing right in front of me. By the time I realized what was happening, she was gone. What was her name? Sophia. The name emerged rough, grief-worn, and she deserved better than what she got. Emma wanted to ask more, to understand the story that had shaped this man into someone who intervened in strangers' lives. But the pain in Adrian's voice suggested the subject was closed, the wound still too raw despite whatever time had passed. Okay, Emma said instead. A week. But I need to contribute somehow. I can't just take... Then cook, Adrian interrupted, or clean, or organize, or do whatever makes you feel less like a charity case. I don't care. But don't refuse help because you've been conditioned to believe you don't deserve it. The observation landed like a slap. Had she been conditioned that way? To refuse help, to minimize her needs, to make herself as unobtrusive as possible? Yes. Daniel had trained her well. Fine, Emma said. A week, but then I figure out my own place, my own path. Agreed. Adrian pushed the notepad toward her. Now, let's talk about the practical stuff. Your job, do you think he'll actually go after it? Yes. Emma felt certain of that. He'll call it concern for my mental health, suggest I need time off, imply I'm unstable, and the board will listen because he's donated money, made connections, positioned himself as a concerned fiancé rather than a controlling manipulator. Then you need to get ahead of it. Adrian's mind was clearly already working through scenarios. Contact your supervisor today. Tell them you've ended your relationship and that your ex-partner may attempt to interfere with your employment. File it as a formal complaint if necessary. Create a paper trail that establishes his behavior as harassment rather than concern. Emma blinked. I hadn't thought of that. You've been trained not to think strategically about protecting yourself. Adrian's voice gentled. That's what abuse does. It makes you reactive instead of proactive. But you're smart, Emma. You built programs, wrote grants, managed budgets. You know how to plan. You just need to apply those skills to your own life. The validation did something to Emma's chest, made it easier to breathe. When was the last time someone had acknowledged her competence instead of questioning it? What else? She asked, pulling the notepad closer. Money. What do you have access to that's solely yours? Emma mentally cataloged her finances. A checking account with about $800. That's it. Everything else was joint accounts or cards Daniel added me to. He said it was easier for managing household expenses, but really it was about control. 800 is a start. Adrian made a note. You'll need to open new accounts at a different bank, ones he has no access to. Transfer the money today, close the old account if possible. Cut off every financial connection. That feels so final. Emma's voice wavered. It is final. Adrian looked up, his dark eyes holding hers. You left him, Emma. That means actually leaving, not keeping one foot in the door in case you change your mind. Half measures are how he'll pull you back. I know, She trailed off, not sure how to explain the fear. You're afraid of being completely alone, Adrian supplied. Afraid that cutting all ties means admitting you were wrong about him, about your relationship, about the last 3 years of your life. Yes, the admission hurt. You weren't wrong. Adrian's voice was firm. You made the best choices you could with the information you had. He presented himself as one thing and revealed himself to be another. That's not your failure. It's his. Emma wanted to believe that, wanted to absolve herself of the guilt that suggested she should have known, should have seen the warning signs, should have been smarter or stronger or less naive. Tell me about your job, Adrian said, shifting topics. What exactly do you do? I'm a program coordinator at Crossroads Community Center. Emma felt herself relax slightly, talking about something she actually loved. I develop and run programs for at-risk youth, art therapy, tutoring, college prep, job training. We serve about 200 kids a year, mostly from low-income families dealing with everything from food insecurity to domestic violence to gang recruitment. And Daniel called this an embarrassment. Adrian's disgust was evident. He called it a poverty complex. Emma's laugh was bitter. Said I was trying to save the world one troubled kid at a time, as if that was something to be ashamed of. Those kids, do they know you left? Emma's heart sank. No, they're probably wondering where I am. I was supposed to run art therapy yesterday, and I just didn't show up. Then that's your second priority today. Adrian pushed the notepad closer. Call your supervisor, explain the situation, and make sure someone knows you're safe. Those kids depend on you. Don't let Daniel's manipulation cost them their advocate. The reminder hit hard. Emma had been so focused on her own crisis that she'd forgotten about Marcus, who needed their weekly sessions to manage his anxiety. About Sophia, who was waiting to hear back about college applications. About James, who'd finally started trusting adults again and needed consistency. You're right, Emma said. I need to call them. Use my phone if you're worried about Daniel tracking yours. Adrian slid his cell across the counter. And Emma? When you talk to your supervisor, be honest. Not dramatic, not emotional, just honest. Explain that you've left an abusive relationship and that your ex may attempt to undermine your employment as retaliation. Abusive, Emma tested the word. Daniel never hit me. Abuse isn't just physical. Adrian's expression was hard. He controlled your money, isolated you from friends, criticized everything you did, and made you believe you were the problem. That's emotional and financial abuse. Call it what it is. Emma had never thought of it that way. Had spent 3 years making excuses, minimizing Daniel's behavior, convincing herself that it wasn't that bad, that she was overreacting, that other people had it worse. But Adrian was right. What she'd endured was abuse, even without bruises to prove it. Okay, Emma said quietly. I'll call them. She took Adrian's phone and stepped out onto the balcony, needing space and air for this conversation. The city spread below, indifferent to her small drama, and somehow that was comforting. The world was so much bigger than Daniel Carter and his need to control. Emma dialed her supervisor's direct line, her heart pounding. Margaret Connolly. Margaret, it's Emma Bennett. Emma! The relief in Margaret's voice was immediate. Thank heavens. We've been worried. Daniel called this morning saying you'd had some kind of breakdown and might need time off. Are you all right? So it had already started. Emma took a breath, steadying herself. I'm fine. Actually, I'm better than I've been in a long time. I left Daniel yesterday, and he's retaliating by trying to undermine my job. I wanted you to hear the truth from me directly. There was a pause on the other end. Left him as in our engagement is over. As in, I'm not going back. As in, he's going to do everything he can to make my life difficult, including trying to get me fired by claiming I'm unstable. Emma gripped the balcony railing. I need you to know that I'm safe, I'm thinking clearly, and I have no intention of abandoning the kids or the programs. But I also need to file a formal complaint that Daniel may attempt to interfere with my employment. Another pause, longer this time. Emma, are you safe? Where are you? I'm staying with a friend while I figure out next steps, but I'm safe, I promise. Okay. Margaret's voice shifted into professional mode. I'll document this conversation and send you the formal complaint forms. And Emma, Daniel Carter is not on our board, he's not a major donor, and he has zero say in your employment. If he calls again, I'll handle it. The support made Emma's eyes sting. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just take care of yourself. And if you need time off to get settled, take it. But come back when you're ready. Those kids need you. Emma hung up, feeling simultaneously lighter and heavier. Margaret's support was real, but so was the knowledge that Daniel had already started his campaign. How many other people had he called? What story was he spinning? She returned inside to find Adrian making breakfast, actual breakfast, with eggs and toast and fresh fruit arranged on plates like he did this regularly. How did it go? He asked, without turning around. Daniel called my supervisor this morning, claiming I'd had a breakdown. Emma set his phone on the counter. But Margaret's on my side. She said if he calls again, she'll handle it. Good. Adrian slid a plate toward her. Eat. Then we'll tackle the financial stuff. You don't have to do all this. Emma gestured at the food, the help, the careful planning. I can figure it out on my own. You can. Adrian met her eyes. But you don't have to. That's the difference between dependence and support. Dependence means you can't survive without someone. Support means you can survive. But having help makes it easier. The distinction settled something in Emma's chest. Thank you, she said quietly. They ate in companionable silence, and Emma found herself studying Adrian covertly. He was a contradiction, dangerous and gentle, powerful and careful. Someone who'd admitted to operating in gray areas but was helping her navigate towards something clearer. She still didn't fully understand his motivations, but she was beginning to trust them. "Can I ask you something?" Emma said finally. "You can ask. I may not answer." "What do you actually do? You said you solve problems, but what does that mean?" Adrian set down his fork. "I run a private security and consultation firm. Sometimes that means protecting people from threats the police can't or won't handle. Sometimes it means recovering assets that were stolen through legal but unethical means. Sometimes it means making problems disappear for people who can afford discretion." Making problems disappear. Emma's voice was carefully neutral. "That sounds ominous." "It can be." Adrian's expression remained calm. "But I have rules. I don't harm innocents. I don't traffic in anything that exploits the vulnerable. And I don't take jobs that violate my personal code, whatever the pay." "And what is your personal code?" "Still writing it?" Adrian's slight smile held no humor. "But it includes not standing by while men like your ex-fiancé systematically destroy women who trusted them." Emma absorbed this, trying to reconcile the man before her with the criminal activities he'd described. "Have you ever killed anyone?" The question emerged before she could stop it, blunt and graceless. Adrian didn't flinch. "Yes." "Should I be afraid of you?" "That's up to you." He held her gaze steadily. "I'm not going to tell you I'm safe, Emma. I'm not going to promise I'm a good person wrapped in a bad reputation. I operate in spaces where violence is sometimes necessary, where the law fails and someone has to step in. But I'm not a threat to you. And if you ever feel like I am, I'll help you leave." The honesty was almost brutal. No reassurance, no platitudes, just raw truth that Emma could accept or reject. "Okay," she said finally. "Thank you for being honest." "It's the least I can do." Adrian stood, collecting their plates. "Now, let's get you to a bank and set up those new accounts. The sooner you're financially independent, the sooner Daniel loses his leverage." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of practical tasks. Adrian drove her to a bank across town, far from any branch Daniel might think to check, and helped her open new accounts with the $800 she'd transferred. He suggested she get a credit card in her own name, start building credit independently, create the financial infrastructure she'd need for true autonomy. Through it all, Emma felt herself growing steadier. Each small step, the new account, the formal complaint, the conversations that established her narrative instead of Daniel's, was a brick in a foundation she was building from scratch. By early afternoon, she was exhausted but functioning. Adrian had retreated to his home office to handle his own work, giving Emma space to process everything. She found herself in the guest room, staring at her phone and the mounting notifications from Daniel. Finally, she opened the messages. The progression was exactly what she'd predicted. Anger. How dare she embarrass him? Demands. Come home immediately. Threats. She'd regret this. Manipulation. He loved her, was worried about her, just wanted to talk. More threats. She was making a huge mistake. Emma read through them all, feeling nothing but a distant sort of pity. This was Daniel at his most honest, stripped of the charming mask he wore in public. This was who he'd always been underneath, and she'd spent 3 years making excuses for it. She typed out a single message. "Do not contact me again. We are done. Any further communication will be documented as harassment." Then she blocked his number. The finality of it made her hands shake, but she didn't undo it. Instead, she blocked him on social media, email, every platform where he might try to reach her, cut the ties completely, the way Adrian had said she needed to. When she emerged from the guest room, she found Adrian in the living room, reading through documents that he quickly set aside when he noticed her. "I blocked him," Emma announced. "Everywhere. Told him not to contact me again." "How do you feel?" Adrian asked. Emma considered the question. "Terrified? Relieved? Like I just burned the only bridge back to shore." "There are other shores." Adrian's voice was quiet. "Better ones. You just have to swim to them instead of drowning where you've been standing." Emma moved to the window, looking out at the city that held her entire future. Uncertain, unplanned, completely open. "What if I can't swim?" Then you learn. Adrian came to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel his presence, but not so close that it felt invasive. One stroke at a time, Emma. You don't have to cross the ocean today, you just have to not drown. She turned to look at him, this stranger who'd become her lifeline. Why are you really helping me? Adrian was quiet for a long time. Because Sophia was drowning and I didn't see it until it was too late. Because I have power and resources, and they're worthless if I don't use them to stop the patterns I failed to break before. He met her eyes. Because you remind me that it's not too late to be better than I was. The raw honesty in his voice made Emma's chest ache. I'm sorry you lost her. So am I. Adrian's expression was difficult to read. But maybe helping you is how I make peace with that failure. Maybe that's selfish, but it's honest. It's not selfish, Emma said softly. It's human. They stood there in silence, two people shaped by loss and control and the desperate need to be better than their circumstances had tried to make them. Outside, the city continued its indifferent rhythm. Inside, something fragile and new was taking shape. Not romance, not dependence, but the possibility of two people choosing to stand rather than drown. Emma took a breath, feeling it fill her lungs completely for the first time in years. She was free. She was terrified. She was alive. And for now, that was enough. 3 days passed in a strange suspension of normal life. Emma fell into a routine that felt both foreign and surprisingly natural. Mornings spent helping at Crossroads over video calls since Margaret had suggested she work remotely while things settled. Afternoons organizing Adrian's extensive library because she needed to feel useful. Evenings cooking dinner because it gave her hands something to do besides shake. Adrian gave her space but remained present, a steady force that neither demanded nor withdrew. He worked from his home office most days, emerging for meals and occasional conversations that ranged from surface pleasantries to surprisingly deep discussions about power, choice, and the weight of past mistakes. Emma found herself drawn to his honesty, the way he never pretended to be better than he was, but also never stopped trying to be better than he'd been. Daniel hadn't contacted her directly. The blocked numbers ensured that, but his presence lingered like smoke. Margaret reported 2 more calls to the center, both times Daniel expressing concern about Emma's mental state. The board had received an email questioning whether someone going through a crisis should be working with vulnerable children. Emma's landlord had called asking about the apartment she technically still rented but hadn't lived in for 8 months, wondering if Mr. Carter's concerns about her well-being were legitimate. The campaign was subtle, insidious, designed to undermine without overtly attacking. It was classic Daniel, poisoning wells while maintaining plausible deniability. He's escalating, Adrian observed over dinner on the 4th night. The calls are getting more frequent, the implications more direct. Emma pushed food around her plate, her appetite diminished by anxiety. Margaret said the board is considering putting me on administrative leave pending a wellness evaluation. Daniel's painted me as unstable, and they're starting to believe it. What did Margaret recommend? That I come in tomorrow for a meeting, show my face, demonstrate I'm fine, counter his narrative directly. Emma set down her fork. But what if I'm not fine? What if they look at me and see exactly what Daniel's been telling them? A woman who had a breakdown and made an impulsive decision? Are you having a breakdown? Adrian's question was direct. No. Emma's answer came quickly, then more slowly. No, I don't think so. I'm scared and uncertain and my entire life is in chaos, but I'm thinking clearly. I made a choice, and I'm dealing with the consequences. Then that's what you tell them. Adrian leaned back in his chair, studying her. You don't need to prove you're perfect, Emma. You just need to prove you're competent. There's a difference. Daniel won't stop. The realization settled heavy in Emma's chest. Even if I convince the board, even if I keep my job, he's going to keep trying to destroy me. That's who he is. I know. Adrian's expression remained neutral, but something harder entered his voice. Which is why you need to decide how you want to handle this, defensively or offensively. Emma looked up sharply. What does that mean? It means you can keep reacting to his attacks, putting out fires as he sets them, defending yourself against an opponent who has more resources and fewer scruples. Adrian paused. Or you can go on offense, make it too costly for him to continue. The suggestion carried implications that made Emma's pulse quicken. I'm not going to threaten him, or I'm not suggesting threats. Adrian's interruption was calm. I'm suggesting consequences. Daniel is attacking you because he believes he can do so without repercussions. What if he couldn't? You mean expose him somehow? Tell people what he did? Emma shook her head. Nobody would believe me. He's a senior partner at a prestigious firm. I'm just a non-profit worker he was gracious enough to date. His version of events will always sound more credible. Not if we have evidence. Adrian pulled out his phone, tapped something, and slid it across the table. Emma found herself looking at what appeared to be financial records, bank statements, credit card transactions, account transfers. Her name appeared frequently, always in contexts that suggested control rather than partnership. Joint accounts where only Daniel had signing authority. Credit cards in her name that she'd never applied for. Purchases she'd never made charged to accounts supposedly shared. How did you get these? Emma's voice was barely a whisper. I solved problems, remember? Adrian's tone remained even. Daniel's financial control over you wasn't just unethical, Emma. Some of it was illegal. Opening credit accounts in someone's name without their consent, using their identity for personal gain, that's fraud. Emma stared at the documents, her mind racing. You're saying I could press charges? I'm saying you have leverage. Adrian retrieved his phone. Daniel thinks he holds all the cards because he has money and position. But you have documentation of financial abuse that could cost him his reputation and potentially his career. That's power, if you choose to use it. The idea was dizzying. For 3 years, Emma had felt powerless against Daniel's machinations. Now Adrian was suggesting she'd had power all along, just hadn't known how to wield it. What would I do with this? Emma asked slowly. You'd have your lawyer contact his lawyer with a simple message. Cease all contact, retract all statements made to third parties about your mental health, and stay out of your life. Or the financial documentation goes to the Illinois State Bar Association along with a formal complaint about ethical violations. Adrian's expression was unreadable. He stops attacking you, or you burn down his career. His choice. I don't have a lawyer. Emma's laugh was slightly hysterical. You do now. Adrian pulled a business card from his wallet. Rebecca Chen, best family law attorney in Chicago, specializes in coercive control cases. I called in a favor. She's expecting to hear from you tomorrow. Emma took the card with shaking hands. This feels like I'm becoming him, using power to hurt someone. No. Adrian's voice was firm. Daniel used power to control and diminish you. You're using it to protect yourself and establish boundaries. That's not the same thing, isn't it? Emma's uncertainty bled through. Where's the line between self-defense and retaliation? Intent. Adrian leaned forward. Daniel's intent was always to make you smaller so he could feel bigger. Your intent is to make him stop attacking you so you can rebuild. One seeks to destroy, the other seeks to survive. That's the line. Emma wanted to believe him, wanted to accept that fighting back didn't make her as bad as Daniel. But 3 years of being told she was too sensitive, too reactive, too vindictive had left scars. What if I'm wrong? The question emerged small. What if using this makes me the monster he's been telling everyone I am? Then you're wrong, and you deal with the consequences. Adrian's honesty was almost brutal. But staying silent while he destroys you doesn't make you noble, Emma. It makes you complicit in your own erasure. The words hit like cold water. Emma had spent so long trying to be the bigger person, to not sink to Daniel's level, to maintain moral high ground that only left her vulnerable to attack. I need to think about it, she said finally. Take your time. Adrian stood, collecting their plates. But while you're thinking, remember that Daniel isn't. He's actively working to destroy your career, your reputation, and your ability to survive independently. Your hesitation is a luxury he's already decided he can exploit. The observation stung because it was true. While Emma debated the ethics of defending herself, Daniel was systematically dismantling her life. That night, sleep came hard. Emma lay in the guest room staring at the ceiling, Rebecca Chen's business card on the nightstand like a live grenade. The power to fight back, to make Daniel stop, to potentially destroy his career the way he was trying to destroy hers. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. But was it right? Emma's phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Despite the late hours, she opened it. The board voted. Administrative leave starting Monday pending wellness evaluation. I'm sorry, Emma. I fought for you, but Daniel's campaign was effective. Call me tomorrow. Emma stared at the message, feeling something crack open in her chest. She'd lost. Despite everything, despite leaving, despite blocking him, despite trying to be proactive, Daniel had won this round. He'd convinced her employers that she was unstable, that she needed to be sidelined, that his version of events was the truth, and she'd let him do it by refusing to fight back. The anger that surged through Emma was white-hot and clarifying. She was done being defensive, done letting Daniel control the narrative, done sacrificing her own survival on the altar of being the bigger person. She grabbed Rebecca Chen's card and composed an email before she could second-guess herself. Ms. Chen, Adrian Russo suggested I contact you. I have documentation of financial abuse by my former fiancé, Daniel Carter, and I need help stopping his ongoing campaign to destroy my career and reputation. Please let me know your availability to discuss representation. Emma hit send before fear could stop her, then sat in the darkness feeling her heartbeat slowly return to normal. She'd just declared war. Made a choice that couldn't be unmade. Crossed a line she'd spent 3 years being told good women didn't cross. And she felt more herself than she had in years. Morning came with a response from Rebecca Chen, professional and direct. She could meet that afternoon. Emma confirmed the appointment, then dressed carefully in clothes that said, competent professional, rather than woman having a breakdown. A distinction Daniel had taught her mattered even as he'd tried to erase it. Adrian was already in the kitchen when she emerged, and something in her expression must have shifted because he simply nodded. You decided, he said. Not a question. I decided. Emma poured coffee with steady hands. I meet with Rebecca this afternoon, and tomorrow I'm going to that board meeting and telling them exactly what Daniel's been doing. Good. Adrian's approval was quiet. How are you feeling? Terrified. Empowered. Like I'm about to find out what happens when you actually fight back instead of just enduring. Emma met his eyes. Thank you. For the lawyer, for the evidence, for not letting me disappear. You did the hard part. Adrian's expression held something that might have been respect. I just pointed out the door. You're the one who chose to walk through it. The meeting with Rebecca Chen happened in a sleek downtown office that radiated competence and discretion. Rebecca herself was 40-something, sharp-eyed, and utterly unimpressed by Emma's apologies for taking up her time. Adrian doesn't call in favors lightly, Rebecca said, gesturing Emma into a chair. Tell me everything. So Emma did. 3 years condensed into 30 minutes. The slow isolation, the financial control, the constant criticism, the systematic dismantling of her confidence and autonomy. The restaurant confrontation and her decision to leave. Daniel's ongoing campaign to destroy her professionally. Rebecca listened without interrupting, taking notes on a legal pad with swift efficiency. When Emma finished, the lawyer sat back and studied her with an expression that suggested she'd heard this story too many times. What you're describing is textbook coercive control, Rebecca said. And the financial documentation Adrian provided shows clear violations of identity theft and fraud statutes. We have multiple angles of attack here. I don't want to attack. Emma's voice was firm. I just want him to stop. Then we make stopping the path of least resistance. Rebecca pulled up something on her computer. Here's what I recommend. We send a cease and desist letter to Daniel and his firm, outlining the financial fraud and making it clear that any further contact or interference constitutes harassment. We include copies of the evidence and note that we're prepared to file formal complaints with both law enforcement and the Illinois State Bar if the behavior continues. Will that work? Emma's skepticism leaked through. Depends on how much he values his career versus his need for control. Rebecca's smile was sharp. But in my experience, men like Daniel care deeply about their professional reputation. The threat of exposure is usually enough to make them back off. And if it isn't? Then we follow through. Rebecca's expression hardened. File the complaints, pursue charges, and make him regret that he didn't take the easy way out. But I suspect once he realizes you're willing to fight and have the resources to do so, he'll retreat. Resources. Emma had resources now. A lawyer, evidence, an ally who understood power dynamics and wasn't afraid to use them. The realization was almost overwhelming. What do I need to do? Emma asked. Sign a retainer agreement, authorize me to represent you, and let me handle communication with Daniel and his representatives. Rebecca slid papers across the desk. Also, document everything. Every call to your employer, every contact attempt, every piece of harassment. We're building a case that shows a pattern of abuse that continued after you left. Emma signed the papers with hands that barely shook. How much is this going to cost? Adrian's covering it. Rebecca's tone suggested this wasn't up for debate. We can discuss repayment terms later if it makes you more comfortable, but for now your job is to focus on rebuilding your life, not worrying about legal fees. The generosity should have made Emma uncomfortable, should have triggered all her instincts about not being dependent. But Adrian's words echoed in her head, the difference between dependence and support. She could survive without this help. Having it just made survival easier. Thank you, Emma said quietly. Don't thank me yet. Wait until we've actually stopped him. Rebecca's smile turned predatory. Though I have to say, I'm looking forward to it. I've dealt with partners at Whitmore and Associates before. They think their money and connections make them untouchable. I enjoy proving them wrong. Emma left the meeting feeling simultaneously lighter and more burdened. She'd taken a step that couldn't be undone, engaged in a fight she'd spent years avoiding. But for the first time, she wasn't fighting alone or fighting defenseless. The board meeting the next morning took place in Crossroads' small conference room. Emma arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in the professional but warm style she'd cultivated before Daniel, before he'd started suggesting her clothes were too attention-seeking or not sophisticated enough. Margaret was already there, along with 3 board members Emma recognized from fundraisers. Emma. Margaret's relief was visible. Thank you for coming. Of course. Emma took a seat, meeting each board member's gaze directly. I understand there are concerns about my ability to continue my work here. We've received some troubling communications, said Robert Chen, the board chair, from your fiancé, former fiancé, suggesting you've been under significant stress and may not be in the best position to work with vulnerable youth right now. Daniel Carter has been calling you because I ended our engagement, and he's retaliating by trying to cost me my job. Emma's voice remained steady. What he's described as concern is actually harassment, and I've retained legal counsel to address it. The bluntness clearly surprised them. Robert exchanged glances with the other board members. That's a serious accusation, he said carefully. It's a serious situation. Emma pulled out her phone, opened her email, and displayed the cease and desist letter Rebecca had sent that morning. My attorney has formally notified Mr. Carter that his interference with my employment constitutes harassment and that any further contact with this organization will result in legal action. My God. Margaret leaned in to read the letter, her expression shifting from concern to anger. Emma, why didn't you tell us this was happening? Because until recently, I believed his version of events more than my own. Emma's honesty made the room quiet. Daniel spent 3 years convincing me that my perceptions were wrong, that I was too sensitive, that any problems in our relationship were my fault. It took leaving him to realize I'd been systematically abused. The word hung in the air. Abuse. Not the dramatic, visible kind that made headlines, but the slow erosion that happened behind closed doors. What exactly happened? Asked Linda Morrison, another board member. So Emma told them. Not everything. They didn't need to know about Adrian or the penthouse or the resources she'd accessed, but enough. The financial control, the isolation, the constant criticism disguised as concern, the decision to leave and Daniel's immediate campaign to punish her for it. He's calling you because he knows the best way to hurt me is through my work, Emma concluded, because unlike him, I actually care about what I do here, so he's weaponizing that care against me. The room was silent for a long moment. Finally, Robert spoke. Ms. Bennett, on behalf of the board, I apologize. We should have questioned Mr. Carter's motives more carefully instead of taking his concerns at face value. You were manipulated by someone very good at manipulation. Emma felt the tightness in her chest ease slightly. I've spent 3 years being manipulated by him. I understand how effective he is. The administrative leave, Linda began, is unnecessary, Margaret interrupted firmly. Emma has been doing her job remotely for the past week without any issues. Her kids ask about her constantly, and frankly, If we punish her for being a victim of abuse by taking away the career she loves, we're complicit in that abuse. The other board members nodded, the energy in the room shifting decisively. Agreed, Robert said. Emma, you're not being placed on leave. However, if Mr. Carter continues to contact us, we'll be documenting it as harassment and forwarding it to your attorney. The relief was dizzying. Emma had walked in expecting to fight for her job and had instead found allies. Thank you, she managed. Don't thank us for doing what we should have done from the start. Margaret's voice was fierce. Now let's talk about next week's programming. Marcus has been asking when you're coming back to run art therapy in person. The rest of the meeting focused on normal things, schedules, budgets, upcoming events. Emma participated with a clarity she'd lost somewhere in the middle of her relationship with Daniel, remembering why she'd loved this work in the first place. When it ended, Margaret walked her out. You seem different, the older woman observed. Stronger somehow. I had help remembering who I was before Daniel tried to erase me. Emma thought of Adrian, his brutal honesty and unexpected support. Turns out I'm more resilient than I thought. Good. Margaret squeezed her shoulder. Because those kids need you, and frankly, so do we. Don't let that man take this from you. Emma promised she wouldn't, then headed back to the penthouse feeling like she'd won a battle she'd expected to lose. Maybe this was what fighting back felt like. Scary and uncomfortable, but ultimately effective. Adrian was waiting when she arrived, his expression questioning. I kept my job, Emma announced. The board sided with me once they understood what was actually happening. Of course they did. Adrian's approval was quiet. You told the truth. Truth tends to be persuasive when it's not being drowned out by manipulation. Rebecca sent the cease and desist this morning. Emma settled onto the couch, exhaustion finally catching up to her. Do you think it'll work? Will Daniel actually stop? I think he'll calculate the cost of continuing versus the cost of his career and make the rational choice. Adrian poured 2 glasses of wine, offering her one. But if he doesn't, we're prepared for that too. The "we" made something warm bloom in Emma's chest. She'd spent so long fighting alone, or not fighting at all, that having someone in her corner felt almost foreign. I never asked, Emma said slowly. What's in this for you? Really? Adrian was quiet for a long moment, swirling wine in his glass. Do you believe in redemption? The question surprised her. I don't know. Maybe? I've done things I'm not proud of. Adrian's voice was distant. Built an empire on moral compromises I told myself were necessary. Hurt people who got in my way. Ignored suffering I could have prevented because it wasn't my problem. He looked at her directly. Sophia died believing she was worthless, that she didn't matter, that the world was better without her in it. And I could have stopped that belief from taking root, but I was too focused on my own ambitions to notice. Emma's throat tightened. That's not your fault. Isn't it? Adrian's smile was bitter. I had power and I used it carelessly. Let someone I cared about disappear while I built monuments to my own importance. That's not noble. That's not forgivable. So, helping me is penance? Maybe. Adrian's honesty was cutting. Or maybe it's just the first time I've used my power for something besides building walls. Either way, you benefit. Does the motivation matter? Emma considered this. I think it does. Because if you're doing this out of guilt, that's about you. But if you're doing it because you've learned something about how power should be used, that's about becoming better. And if it's both, Adrian asked quietly, then you're human. Emma set down her wine glass. Flawed and trying, which is more than most people manage. They sat in comfortable silence, 2 people shaped by loss and control and the desperate need to be better than their worst moments. Outside, the city continued its indifferent rhythm. Inside, something fragile continued to grow. Not romance exactly, but recognition. 2 people who'd both learned hard lessons about power and were trying to figure out how to live with what they'd learned. Emma's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. This isn't over, Emma. You think a lawyer's letter scares me? You're making a mistake you'll regret. She showed Adrian the message, her hand steady, despite the chill that ran through her. So he's not taking the easy way, Adrian observed, his expression hardening. Rebecca warned him, the board sided with you, and he's still threatening. That's escalation. What do we do? Emma asked. We document it. Send it to Rebecca and prepare for the next phase. Adrian's voice carried an edge Emma hadn't heard before. He wants a fight? Fine. But he's not going to like how it ends. The shift in Adrian's demeanor was subtle but unmistakable, the careful ally becoming something more dangerous. Emma should have been frightened, should have recognized the warning signs of someone prepared to use violence. Instead, she felt protected. "You'd hurt him for me," Emma said softly. Not a question. "I'd end him for you." Adrian's honesty was brutal. "If he pushes this far enough, I'll make sure Daniel Carter regrets every choice he's made since the night you left. But that's a last resort, Emma. First we try legal channels, social pressure, making it too costly for him to continue. Violence is what happens when those fail." "Have they failed before?" Emma needed to know. "Have you had to?" "Yes. One word, absolute. I've had to protect people from threats that wouldn't stop any other way, and I'd do it again if necessary. But I'd prefer Daniel simply accept that he's lost and move on." Emma absorbed this, trying to reconcile the man who'd made her breakfast with the one casually discussing violence as a practical solution. But maybe that was the point. People were complicated, capable of both gentleness and brutality depending on what the situation demanded. "I don't want you to hurt him," Emma said finally, "but I also can't let him destroy me just to maintain moral high ground." "Then we find a middle path." Adrian pulled out his phone, typed something. "I know people who can make Daniel's life uncomfortable without crossing legal lines. Social pressure, professional consequences, making him understand that attacking you costs him more than letting go." "What kind of people?" Emma's pulse quickened. "The kind who understand power dynamics and aren't afraid to exploit them." Adrian's smile held no warmth. "Daniel thinks he's untouchable because he's a partner at a prestigious firm. Let's test that assumption." The plan that emerged over the next hour was subtle, insidious, and deeply satisfying. Adrian's contacts would ensure Daniel's colleagues learned about the cease and desist letter and the accusations it contained. Word would spread that he was being investigated for financial fraud and harassment. His professional reputation, the thing he valued above Emma's well-being, would be quietly dismantled. "It's not illegal," Adrian explained. "It's just information reaching the people who need to know it. What they do with that information is their choice." "It feels manipulative," Emma said, but without real conviction. "It is manipulative." Adrian didn't pretend otherwise. "But manipulation in service of stopping abuse is different from manipulation in service of causing it. Daniel used information control to isolate and diminish you. We're using it to protect you and establish consequences. The tools are similar. The intent is opposite." Emma thought about this, about the ethics of fighting dirty against someone who'd never fought fair. When does the person fighting the monster become the monster? When they forget why they started fighting. Adrian's voice was quiet. When hurting someone becomes the goal instead of stopping them. When power becomes an end rather than a means. He met her eyes. "Stay focused on survival, Emma. On rebuilding. On making sure Daniel can't hurt you anymore. As long as that's your goal, you're not the monster. You're just someone who refused to drown." The words settled something in Emma's chest. She wasn't becoming Daniel by defending herself. She was becoming someone who understood that survival sometimes required getting uncomfortable with power. "Okay," Emma said. "Do it." Adrian made the calls, his conversations brief and coded in language Emma didn't fully understand but could interpret well enough. By the time he finished, Daniel's reputation was being quietly dismantled by whispers in the right ears, questions planted with the right people, doubts seated in professional circles that valued appearance above all else. "How long before he knows what's happening?" Emma asked. "He probably already suspects." Adrian poured more wine. "Daniel's not stupid. He knows that threatening you after a legal warning was a mistake. Now he's going to realize that mistake has consequences." "And then what?" "Then he makes a choice." Adrian's expression was unreadable. Back off and salvage what he can of his reputation, or double down and lose everything. Smart money's on him backing off. Pride's expensive, but not as expensive as destroying your career. Emma wanted to believe that. Wanted to think Daniel would calculate the costs and make the rational decision. But she'd spent 3 years with him, knew how his mind worked, understood the way his ego drove decisions that logic would reject. "He might not be smart about this," Emma said quietly. "He might see backing down as weakness. might decide hurting me is worth the professional cost. Then we moved to phase 2. Adrian's voice carried an edge that made Emma shiver. And I make him understand what real consequences look like. The promise hung between them, dark and certain. Emma should have been afraid of the man who could make such promises with calm assurance, should have recognized the danger in aligning herself with someone comfortable with violence. But all she felt was safe. The phone rang, shattering the moment, Rebecca Chen's name on the screen. "Rebecca," Emma answered on speaker. "Emma, we have a problem." The lawyer's voice was tight. "Daniel just filed a defamation lawsuit against you, claiming your accusations of abuse have damaged his professional reputation. He's seeking damages and a public retraction." The room spun. Emma gripped the counter for stability. "Can he do that?" Her voice came out small. "He can file anything he wants. Whether it'll survive is another question." Rebecca's tone turned calculating. "But this is aggressive. He's not backing down. He's escalating. We need to meet tomorrow and discuss strategy." "We'll be there," Adrian said, his voice calm despite the fury Emma could see building in his expression. "What time?" They scheduled the meeting, and when Rebecca hung up, Emma felt tears threatening. "He's suing me. After everything he did, he's making me the villain and suing me for telling the truth. He's desperate." Adrian moved closer, his presence steadying. "This is what cornered animals do. They attack. But lawsuits require discovery, Emma. That means everything comes out. Every piece of financial abuse, every controlling text, every witness to his behavior. He's essentially handed us the tools to destroy him in a public forum. Or he's betting I won't fight back." Emma's voice cracked. "Betting I'll be too scared of public exposure, too worried about my reputation, too exhausted to keep fighting. And maybe he's right." "Is he?" Adrian's question was quiet but sharp. "Are you too scared to fight?" Emma thought about it. Really thought about it. Imagined a lawsuit, depositions, having to relive 3 years of abuse in legal proceedings. Imagined Daniel's lawyers painting her as unstable, vindictive, a woman scorned making false accusations. Then she imagined backing down, issuing a retraction, admitting she'd lied when she'd finally told the truth. Letting Daniel win because fighting was too hard. "No," Emma said, surprised by the certainty in her voice. "I'm terrified, but I'm not too scared to fight." "Good." Adrian's approval was quiet but absolute. "Then tomorrow we tell Rebecca we're not settling, not retracting, and not backing down. We take this to court if necessary and let Daniel explain his financial fraud to a jury." "He'll destroy me in the media," Emma whispered. "He'll try." Adrian's expression was hard. "But I know people in media too, and the story of an abusive partner suing his victim for speaking out? That's not the narrative he thinks it is." Emma wanted to believe him. Wanted to trust that fighting back would lead to anything besides more pain, but she'd spent so long being diminished that believing in her own power felt almost impossible. "I'm so tired," she admitted, "of fighting, of being scared, of wondering when he'll finally just leave me alone." "I know," Adrian's voice gentled, "but you're also stronger than you think. You left him, blocked him, got a lawyer, kept your job, stood up to his manipulation. You've already won battles you didn't think you could survive." The reminder made something fierce bloom in Emma's chest. He was right. She'd already fought and won more than she'd thought possible. One more battle, even a legal one, was just another test of the strength she'd been building. "Okay," Emma said, straightening her shoulders. "Tomorrow we tell Rebecca we're fighting. Tonight I'm going to sleep because I'm exhausted, and tomorrow is going to be hell." "Tomorrow's going to be war," Adrian corrected. "Hell comes after, when Daniel realizes he made a fatal mistake." Emma managed a weak smile. "You're very confident for someone who just learned his—" She stopped, not sure how to finish. Friend seemed insufficient. Allie was too distant. Whatever Adrian was, he mattered. "For someone who just had learned his investment is being sued?" Adrian supplied with dark humor. "I'm confident because I know how this ends, Emma. Daniel loses. The only question is how much it costs him before he accepts that." The certainty in his voice was almost intoxicating. Emma wanted to believe it, wanted to trust that the man who'd appeared out of nowhere would somehow make everything right. But she'd spent 3 years trusting someone who'd used that trust to hurt her. How could she know Adrian was different? As if reading her mind, Adrian spoke quietly. You don't have to trust me. You just have to trust yourself. I'm offering resources and support, but this fight is yours. You decide how to wage it, when to push, when to retreat. I'm just here to make sure you're not fighting alone." The distinction mattered. Emma wasn't trading Daniel's control for Adrian's. She was accepting support while maintaining autonomy. The difference was everything. "Thank you," Emma said quietly, "for all of this. For seeing me when I'd almost disappeared. For helping me remember I'm worth fighting for. You were always worth fighting for." Adrian's expression was unreadable. "You just needed to remember it yourself." That night, Emma lay in the guest room trying to process everything. The lawsuit, the escalation, the looming battle that would force her to relive her worst moments in legal proceedings. It should have broken her, should have sent her spiraling into the kind of breakdown Daniel had been claiming she was having. Instead, she felt something she'd almost forgotten. She felt angry. Not the helpless, frustrated anger that came from being trapped, the fierce, clarifying anger that came from being pushed too far. Daniel had spent 3 years taking from her confidence, her autonomy, her sense of self. Now he wanted her silence too, wanted to punish her for finally speaking truth. And Emma realized with startling clarity that she was done giving him anything. Tomorrow she'd meet with Rebecca, plan their legal strategy, and prepare for war. Tonight she'd sleep, knowing that for the first time in 3 years, she was fighting for herself instead of against herself. The city glittered outside her window, indifferent and beautiful. Somewhere out there, Daniel was probably celebrating what he thought was a brilliant tactical move. Let him celebrate. Let him think he'd scared her into submission. He was about to learn what happened when someone who'd been drowning finally remembered they could stand. And Emma intended to make that lesson count. The morning brought news that shifted the entire battlefield. Emma was still drinking her first coffee when Rebecca called, her voice carrying an edge of satisfaction that immediately caught attention. "Daniel withdrew the lawsuit," Rebecca announced without preamble. "His attorney contacted me an hour ago. They're dropping all claims and requesting we not pursue counter-litigation." Emma nearly dropped her mug. "What, why?" "Because someone leaked the financial fraud documentation to the managing partners at Whitmore and Associates." Rebecca's tone suggested she knew exactly who that someone was. Apparently, opening fraudulent credit accounts in a former partner's name while employed at a firm that handles white-collar criminal defense is what we call catastrophically bad optics. Emma's gaze found Adrian across the kitchen, and he met her eyes with an expression that confirmed everything. He'd made good on his promise, had used his connections to ensure the right people learned the right information at the right time. "What happens now?" Emma asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Now Daniel focuses on not losing his partnership," Rebecca said. "The firm's opening an internal investigation. If they find what I think they'll find, he'll be lucky to keep his law license, let alone his position. The lawsuit was withdrawn because his attorney realized pursuing you would mean discovery, and discovery would mean all of this becoming public record." "So he's just done?" The concept felt almost impossible after weeks of escalating attacks. "He's neutralized," Rebecca corrected. "Whether he's done depends on how much self-preservation instinct he has. But I suspect facing potential disbarment has clarified his priorities. Men like Daniel care more about their careers than their vendettas once the cost becomes real." After the call ended, Emma sat in silence, processing what felt like an anticlimactic ending to a war she'd been bracing for. No dramatic courtroom confrontation, no public vindication, just quiet destruction of Daniel's foundation until he had no choice but to retreat. "You leaked it," Emma said finally, looking at Adrian. "I ensured the right people had access to accurate information." Adrian's correction was deliberate. What they chose to do with that information was their decision. That's semantics, but Emma couldn't muster real anger. "You destroyed his career." "I gave him a choice." Adrian's voice remained calm. "Stop attacking you, or face consequences." He chose to escalate with the lawsuit. This is what escalation costs. Emma thought about Daniel somewhere across the city, probably in a conference room, being questioned by managing partners, watching everything he'd built start to crumble. She waited for guilt, for sympathy, for some echo of the woman who'd spent 3 years making excuses for his behavior. Instead, she felt nothing but relief. I should feel bad about this, Emma said quietly. About his career being destroyed, about him facing potential disbarment. But I don't. Does that make me a terrible person? It makes you someone who stopped setting yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. Adrian moved closer, leaning against the counter. Daniel made choices that had consequences. You're not responsible for protecting him from those consequences. He'll blame me anyway. Emma knew Daniel well enough to predict that. He'll never accept that his own actions caused this. In his mind, I'll always be the vindictive ex who destroyed him. Let him think that. Adrian's expression was unreadable. His opinion of you stopped mattering the night you left Aurelius. The truth of it settled over Emma like a revelation. Daniel's judgment, his approval, his version of who she should be, none of it held power anymore unless she gave it power, and she was done making that mistake. I should go to work, Emma said, surprised by how normal the words felt. Actually go to the office, see the kids in person. I've been remote long enough. Are you ready for that? Adrian asked, and Emma appreciated that he questioned rather than assumed. I think so. She considered it honestly. The board knows the truth. Margaret's on my side. And if anyone asks about Daniel, I'll just say we ended things and I'm moving forward. Simple, clean, true. What about here? Adrian gestured around the penthouse. You've been staying a week. It's been almost 2. The observation made Emma's pulse quicken. She'd fallen into a routine that felt dangerously comfortable. Mornings in Adrian's kitchen, evenings cooking dinner together, nights sleeping in a guest room that had started to feel less like temporary shelter and more like a space she belonged. I should probably look for my own place, Emma said, though the words felt hollow. I can't keep imposing on your hospitality. You're not imposing. Adrian's voice was quiet. But if you want your own space, I understand. Independence matters. It does. Emma met his eyes. But so does not making decisions out of fear that accepting help makes me weak or dependent. I'm not ready to live alone yet. Not because I can't, but because I don't want to. Is that okay? The question hung between them, vulnerable and honest. Adrian studied her for a long moment. It's okay, he said finally. Stay as long as you need. But Emma, we should probably talk about what this is becoming. Emma's heart stuttered. What do you mean? I mean, we've been living together for 2 weeks, and somewhere in that time, this stopped being just about giving you a safe place to land. Adrian's honesty was careful, but direct. I'm not good at relationships. My work doesn't lend itself to stability or normal domestic life. But I care about what happens to you, and I think you feel something similar. The admission made Emma's breath catch. She'd been so focused on rebuilding herself that she hadn't examined the growing connection between them. The easy conversations, the comfortable silences, the way Adrian's presence had become something she looked forward to rather than simply tolerated. I do feel something, Emma admitted, but I also just left a relationship where I lost myself completely. I'm not sure I trust my judgment about what I feel versus what I've been conditioned to feel. Fair. Adrian didn't look hurt by the honesty, which is why I'm not asking for anything. I'm just acknowledging that something's shifted and we should both be aware of it. What if I'm not ready for anything to shift? Emma's voice was small. What if I need to just be alone, figure out who I am without someone else's expectations shaping me? Then that's what you do. Adrian's acceptance was immediate. I'm not Daniel, Emma. I'm not going to punish you for having boundaries or needing space. If you want to stay here as roommates with separate lives, fine. If you want to move out and we never speak again, that's fine too. I want you to have choices, not obligations. The freedom in his words was almost overwhelming. After 3 years of every choice being fraught with consequences, Adrian's casual acceptance of her autonomy felt revolutionary. Can I think about it? Emma asked. About what I want this to be? Take all the time you need. Adrian pushed off the counter. I'm going to be traveling for work next week anyway. 3 days in New York handling a client situation. You'll have the place to yourself to figure out what you want. The knowledge that he'd be gone created an unexpected ache in Emma's chest. She'd gotten used to his presence, the steady reliability of someone who asked nothing while offering everything. What kind of client situation? Emma asked, partly curious, partly deflecting from feelings she wasn't ready to examine. The kind where someone powerful is threatening someone vulnerable, and the vulnerable person has hired me to make it stop. Adrian's expression hardened slightly. Similar to your situation, actually, except this client's ex-husband has significantly more resources and fewer scruples than Daniel. Is it dangerous? The question emerged before Emma could stop it. Sometimes. Adrian's honesty was brutal. But I'm good at what I do, and I don't take unnecessary risks. That's not reassuring. Emma felt fear curl in her stomach, not for herself, but for him. It's honest. Adrian's slight smile held no warmth. I'm not going to lie to you about my work, Emma. It's morally gray at best, occasionally dangerous, and definitely not the kind of thing someone trying to build a normal life should be involved with. Are you trying to scare me away? Emma asked quietly. I'm trying to be realistic about what being in my life means. Adrian held her gaze. You deserve someone stable, safe, uncomplicated. Someone who comes home at 5 and worries about quarterly reports instead of whether the person they're protecting will survive the night. I'm not that person. I don't want that person. The words emerged with startling certainty. I spent 3 years with someone who looked perfect on paper and was poison underneath. You're the opposite. Dangerous on the surface, but somehow the safest person I've ever known. Adrian's expression shifted, something vulnerable flickering in his dark eyes. You don't know me well enough to say that. Maybe not. Emma moved closer. But I know you've given me nothing but honesty and choice since the moment we met. I know you've protected me without trying to control me. I know you've seen me at my weakest and never used it against me. That's more than Daniel managed in 3 years. That's a low bar. Adrian's voice was rough. It's higher than you think. Emma stopped just short of touching him, close enough to feel the heat of his body. I'm not saying I'm ready for a relationship. I'm not even sure I know what a healthy one looks like. But I know I don't want you to be careful with me because you think I'm too fragile to handle reality. You're not fragile. Adrian's hands flexed like he wanted to reach for her but was restraining himself. You're one of the strongest people I've met, but strength doesn't mean you're ready for the kind of complications my life brings. Let me decide that. Emma's voice was firm. Stop making choices for me based on what you think I can handle. Tell me the truth and let me choose how to respond. The challenge hung between them, a test of whether Adrian could actually practice the autonomy he preached. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, and Emma could see the war happening behind his eyes, the desire to protect versus the commitment to let her choose. All right, Adrian said finally. The truth. I care about you more than is probably wise given how recently you left an abusive relationship. I want to give you time and space to heal, but I also want to be selfish and keep you close. My work is dangerous and will continue to be dangerous because I'm good at it and it pays extremely well, and I'm not interested in changing careers. If you stay in my life, you'll be exposed to that danger peripherally, and I have no idea how to navigate any of this without either controlling you the way Daniel did or being so hands-off that I fail you the way I failed Sophia. The raw honesty hit Emma like a physical force. This was what truth looked like when someone wasn't using it to manipulate. Uncomfortable, vulnerable, and completely without agenda. Thank you, Emma said quietly, for trusting me with that. What do you want, Emma? Adrian's voice was almost gentle. Forget what you think you should want, or what's practical, or what makes sense. What do you actually want? Emma thought about it, really thought about it. Not about obligations or expectations or what would make her look stable and recovered, just about what would make her happy. I want to go to work today and remember what it feels like to be good at something, she said slowly. I want to come back here tonight and cook dinner in your kitchen and tell you about my day. I want you to go to New York next week and come back safe. And I want time to figure out what happens after that without pressure or expectations. Done. Adrian's acceptance was immediate. Anything else? Emma stepped closer, closing the remaining distance between them. I want to stop being afraid that caring about someone means losing myself. I want to believe it's possible to be close to someone without being consumed by them. It is possible, Adrian's voice was rough, but it requires both people actively choosing it every day. Checking in, maintaining boundaries, being honest even when it's uncomfortable. It's work, Emma. Good relationships are always work. I'm not afraid of work. Emma reached out tentatively, her hand finding his. I'm afraid of losing myself again, but I think maybe with the right person, I could learn to trust that won't happen. Adrian's fingers closed around hers, warm and steady. I'm not going to tell you I'm the right person, but I promise I'll never ask you to be smaller so I can feel bigger. That's the baseline. Everything else we figure out together, or we don't figure out at all. The promise settled something in Emma's chest. Not certainty. She was done with certainty, had learned it was usually just control wearing a mask. But possibility. The chance that something real could grow in the space between two damaged people choosing honesty over easy comfort. I should get ready for work, Emma said, reluctantly releasing his hand. You should. Adrian stepped back, giving her space. For what it's worth, those kids are lucky to have you. The validation made Emma smile as she headed toward the guest room. An hour later, she was dressed in clothes that felt like herself, professional but warm, competent but approachable, and heading out the door with a confidence she'd thought Daniel had destroyed. Crossroads Community Center occupied a converted warehouse in a neighborhood that gentrification hadn't quite reached. The building was worn but well-maintained, covered in murals the kids had painted over the years. Emma felt something in her chest ease as she walked through the front door and was immediately engulfed by familiar chaos. Miss Emma! Marcus appeared from nowhere, all 15 years and gangly limbs. You're back. We thought maybe you'd quit or something. Never. Emma hugged him, feeling the tension he carried in his shoulders. How are you? How's the anxiety been? Better when you're here. Marcus's honesty was cutting. Worse when you're not. Are you staying now? Really staying? Really staying? Emma looked around at the other kids emerging from various program rooms, their faces lighting up when they saw her. I'm sorry I was gone. Some things in my personal life got complicated, but they're settled now. Your fiancé seemed worried about you. Sophia approached cautiously, her intelligent eyes assessing. He called Margaret like 5 times asking if you were okay. The manipulation made Emma's jaw tighten, but she kept her voice level. My former fiancé and I are no longer together. He wasn't actually worried about me. He was trying to cause problems because I ended our relationship. But Margaret handled it, and everything's fine now. Good. Sophia's fierce protectiveness was visible. He seemed like a jerk anyway. Too smooth, you know? Like the guys who come around here trying to recruit for gangs, all charm and no substance. The observation was painfully accurate. Emma wondered what it said about Daniel that a 17-year-old who'd survived the streets could see through him while she'd spent 3 years making excuses. You've got good instincts, Emma told Sophia. Trust them. The morning passed in the comfortable rhythm of work Emma actually loved. Art therapy with Marcus, where he painted his anxiety as dark storms gradually clearing. College application help with Sophia, who was applying to 6 schools and terrified she wouldn't get in anywhere. Conflict mediation between 2 kids who'd been arguing over basketball court access, but were really fighting about deeper issues neither wanted to name. This was why Emma had fought to keep her job. Not because the pay was good, it wasn't, or because the work was easy, it definitely wasn't. But because here, she mattered. Here, she made a tangible difference in lives that society often wrote off as lost causes. Here, she was valued for exactly who she was, rather than who someone wanted her to become. Margaret found her at lunch, settling into the chair across from Emma's desk with the kind of purposeful movement that suggested an important conversation was coming. You look better, Margaret observed. More like yourself than you have in months. I feel better. Emma set down her sandwich. Leaving Daniel was the right choice, even though it's been terrifying. I'm glad you had support. Margaret's tone was careful. That friend you mentioned, they've been helpful. Emma thought about how to describe Adrian. Friend seemed insufficient. Protector felt too passive. Complicated ally who'd systematically dismantled her ex-fiancé's career while teaching her about healthy boundaries. Accurate but unwieldy. Very helpful, Emma said finally. They reminded me I was worth fighting for. Good. Margaret's approval was evident. Because you are. And Emma, I want you to know that what happened with Daniel, the way the board initially responded to his calls, that was a failure on our part. We should have questioned his narrative instead of accepting it at face value. You didn't know. Emma's absolution was genuine. Daniel's very good at manipulation. He had me convinced for 3 years that everything wrong in our relationship was my fault. That's what abusers do. Margaret's voice was fierce. They isolate, They gaslight, they make their victims doubt reality. I should have recognized the pattern instead of being swayed by his supposed concern. You recognized it eventually. Emma managed to smile. That's what matters. For the record, if he contacts us again, I'm filing harassment charges myself. Margaret's protective fury was almost comforting. Nobody messes with my staff and gets away with it. The afternoon brought more sessions, more kids working through trauma and poverty and violence with the limited tools Emma could provide. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. But it was something. And something was infinitely better than nothing. By the time Emma left Crossroads, exhaustion and satisfaction were competing for dominance. She'd forgotten how good it felt to be competent, to use skills she'd honed over years, to know absolutely that she was making the right impact in the right way. The penthouse was empty when she returned. A note from Adrian on the counter explaining he'd been called away early for the New York situation. The 3 days alone stretched ahead, and Emma felt the strange duality of relief and disappointment. She needed space to think, to process, to figure out who she was without anyone else's presence shaping her choices. But she'd also gotten used to Adrian's company, the easy conversations and comfortable silences that had become part of her daily rhythm. Emma spent the evening cooking for one, the kitchen feeling too large without someone to share it with. She ate at the counter scrolling through apartment listings, trying to determine if she was ready to live alone or if that was just another should masquerading as genuine want. Her phone buzzed. Adrian's name on the screen. Made it to New York. Client situation worse than anticipated, but manageable. How was your first day back? Emma smiled at the text, appreciating that he'd checked in without being invasive. Good. Kids were happy to see me. Margaret apologized for initially believing Daniel's BS. Felt like myself again. The response came quickly. Good. That's who you should always feel like. Don't let anyone, including me, convince you otherwise. The reminder was deliberate, Emma realized. Adrian establishing boundaries even in his absence, making it clear she should prioritize her own identity over any relationship. Noted. Be safe in New York. I'm always safe. Sleep well, Emma. The 3 days passed in a strange limbo. Emma worked at Crossroads, came home to the empty penthouse, and slowly rediscovered what it felt like to be alone without being lonely. She cooked meals she actually wanted to eat, watched movies Daniel would have mocked, wore pajamas all weekend without anyone commenting on her appearance. It was peaceful, restorative, and by the 3rd day, she was ready for Adrian to come home. The realization should have worried her, that she'd started thinking of his penthouse as home, that she'd started missing his presence, that she'd started imagining a future that included him. But Emma was done second-guessing every feeling. She missed him. That was allowed. Missing someone didn't mean she was dependent on them. Adrian returned late on the 3rd evening, looking exhausted and carrying tension in his shoulders that suggested the New York situation had been worse than manageable. How bad? Emma asked, handing him a glass of whiskey without asking if he wanted it. Bad. Adrian accepted the drink gratefully. Client's ex-husband hired people to kill her. We stopped it, but barely. She's safe now, relocating with a new identity. But it was closer than I'd like. The casual mention of murder attempts made Emma's blood run cold. Were you in danger? Some. Adrian's honesty was brutal, but I had backup, and we knew it was coming. Still, I'm getting too old for situations that involve gunfire. Gunfire. Emma's voice was faint. You were shot at? Shot near. Adrian's distinction was probably meant to be reassuring. Nobody hit me. The other guys weren't as lucky. Emma processed this, trying to reconcile the man drinking whiskey and designer clothes with someone who'd apparently been in a firefight 3 days ago. You could have been killed, she said quietly. I could be killed crossing the street. Adrian's pragmatism was infuriating. This is what I do, Emma. It's dangerous sometimes, but I'm very good at not dying. That's not comforting. Emma felt fear and anger warring in her chest. What if you weren't good enough? What if something went wrong? Then you'd have this penthouse and access to accounts I've set up to make sure you're taken care of. Adrian's bluntness made Emma's breath catch. I'm not careless about my safety, but I'm also realistic. My work carries risks. If that's something you can't accept, I understand. Don't do that, Emma's voice shook. Don't make this about me accepting or rejecting who you are. I'm allowed to be scared for you without it being an ultimatum. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. You're right. I'm sorry. I'm not used to having someone care whether I come back. The admission broke something open in Emma's chest. She moved closer, taking the whiskey glass from his hand and setting it aside. I care whether you come back, she said quietly. I spent 3 days missing you, and that terrified me because I'm supposed to be figuring out how to be alone. But I don't want to be alone if being alone means not having you in my life. Emma, let me finish. Emma's voice was firm. I know this is complicated. I know I just left an abusive relationship and probably shouldn't jump into anything new. I know your work is dangerous and your life is chaotic and we barely know each other, but I also know that being with you feels nothing like being with Daniel. You make me feel stronger instead of weaker, seen instead of invisible, free instead of trapped. That's the bare minimum, Adrian said roughly. That's how everyone should make you feel. But they don't. Emma's honesty was cutting. Most people make me feel small or demanding or too much. You make me feel like exactly enough. Adrian's expression cracked, vulnerability showing through the careful control. I don't know how to do this. I've spent 15 years building walls and operating alone. I don't know how to let someone in without either controlling them or failing them. So we figure it out together. Emma took his hand. We make mistakes and fix them. We communicate even when it's uncomfortable. We choose each other every day instead of just assuming it's permanent. What if I hurt you? Adrian's fear was raw. Not intentionally, but through carelessness or absence or just being who I am? Then you hurt me and we deal with it. Emma's voice was steady. I'm not going to shatter Adrian. Daniel spent 3 years trying to break me, and I'm still here. I'm stronger than either of us gives me credit for. The truth of it settled between them. Emma had survived systematic abuse and come out fighting. She'd left everything behind on nothing but instinct. She'd fought for her job, her reputation, her right to exist outside someone else's control. She was strong enough for this. Strong enough for complicated and dangerous and uncertain. Okay, Adrian said finally, we try. But the second this feels like Daniel, the second I'm controlling you or you're losing yourself, you tell me, and we course correct or we end it. Deal. Emma stepped closer. Same goes for you. The second this feels unhealthy from your side, you say something. We both stay honest. I can do honest. Adrian's hands found her waist, tentative but sure. I'm not good at much else, but I can do honest. That's all I need. Emma rose on her toes, closing the final distance between them. The kiss was different from anything Emma had experienced with Daniel. Not demanding or possessive or designed to prove ownership, just two people choosing connection after spending too long alone. When they finally broke apart, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. I'm still going to New York sometimes, he said quietly. Still going to handle situations that might involve gunfire. Still going to be morally gray and complicated. I know. Emma's acceptance was absolute. And I'm still going to work with at-risk kids for terrible pay. Still going to have panic attacks sometimes when something triggers memories of Daniel. Still going to need space to figure out who I am outside any relationship. Sounds like we're both disasters. Adrian's smile was soft. Sounds like we're both human, Emma corrected, trying our best with what we've got. They stood there in the kitchen, two broken people who'd somehow found each other in the wreckage of their respective pasts. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't simple, but it was real in a way Emma had almost forgotten was possible. Stay, Adrian said quietly. Not as a guest or someone I'm helping. Just stay. Okay, Emma whispered. I'll stay. The decision settled over her like peace, not because Adrian completed her or fixed her or made everything better, but because choosing him, choosing this, was choosing herself too. Her judgment, her instincts, her right to build a life that felt true instead of safe. Daniel had tried to convince her she couldn't trust herself, that her choices were wrong, her feelings invalid, her instincts broken. But Emma had trusted herself enough to leave, to fight back, to stand up when drowning would have been easier. And now she was trusting herself enough to stay, not out of fear or dependence or lack of options, but because this, Adrian, this complicated, dangerous, honest man, felt right in a way nothing had felt right in years. They moved to the couch, talking late into the night about New York and crossroads and the strange shape their lives were taking. Adrian told her about the client he'd saved, a woman not unlike Emma who'd finally gotten brave enough to run. Emma told him about Marcus's latest painting, about Sophia's college dreams, about the small victories that made her work worthwhile. It was normal and domestic and completely at odds with the danger Adrian had faced days ago. But maybe that was the point. Maybe real life was always a contradiction, always dangerous and safe, always complicated and simple, depending on how you looked at it. "Thank you," Emma said as exhaustion finally won, "for seeing me, for helping me remember I was worth saving." "You saved yourself," Adrian corrected gently. "I just offered a hand when you were ready to take it." "Then thank you for offering." Emma let her eyes close, "and for not letting go." "Never." Adrian's promise was quiet but absolute. "You're stuck with me now." Emma smiled against his shoulder. "Good." They fell asleep there on the couch, two people who'd been drowning in their respective ways, finally learning how to breathe. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't simple. But it was theirs, built on honesty and choice and the radical belief that damaged people could still create something beautiful. Outside, the city glittered in indifferent beauty. Inside, two people who'd both learned hard lessons about power were writing new rules. Not about control or possession or losing yourself in someone else, but about standing together while remaining whole. About choosing daily instead of assuming forever. About believing that the right person wouldn't ask you to be smaller, but would challenge you to grow. Emma had spent 3 years shrinking. Now she was finally expanding again, reclaiming space she'd forgotten she was allowed to occupy. And Adrian, complicated, dangerous, honest Adrian, was making sure she had room to breathe. 3 months had passed since that night on the couch, and Emma was learning that healing wasn't linear. Some days she woke up feeling invincible, certain she'd conquered every demon Daniel had planted. Other days, a casual comment or unexpected memory would send her spiraling, convinced she'd made terrible choices and was destined to repeat old patterns. Today was somewhere in between. She stood in the bedroom she now officially shared with Adrian, no longer the guest room, no longer temporary, staring at an envelope that had arrived via courier. Her name written in handwriting she'd once found elegant but now recognized as controlling, each letter perfectly formed because Daniel couldn't tolerate imperfection even in penmanship. "You going to open it?" Adrian asked from the doorway, his tone carefully neutral. Emma turned the envelope over, feeling its weight. "I'm trying to decide if that gives him power or takes it away." "What does your instinct say?" It was the question Adrian asked about everything, constantly redirecting Emma back to her own judgment instead of offering his opinion. At first it had frustrated her. She'd wanted guidance, reassurance, someone to tell her what to do. Now she understood it was the greatest gift he could give her, trust in her own mind. "My instinct says it's probably a manipulation." Emma set the envelope on the dresser. "Either an apology designed to make me doubt myself, or blame designed to make me feel guilty, or some combination that ends with him suggesting we talk." "And do you want to talk to him?" "No." The answer came immediately, certain. "Whatever he has to say, I don't need to hear it. I know what happened. I know who he is. His version of events doesn't matter anymore." "Then don't read it." Adrian moved closer, his presence steady. "Or read it and burn it. Or read it and respond. But make the choice yours, not his." Emma looked at the envelope again, feeling the familiar pull of old conditioning. Daniel had trained her to read every communication, respond to every demand, prioritize his need to be heard over her need for peace. But she wasn't that woman anymore. She picked up the envelope and walked to the kitchen, Adrian following silently. The gas stove provided convenient finality. Emma held the envelope to the flame and watched it catch, curl, blacken. Whatever words Daniel had written dissolved into ash without ever touching her mind. "How do you feel?" Adrian asked as she washed the ash down the sink. "Free." Emma dried her hands, surprised by the truth of it. 3 months ago, I would have read that letter 100 times, analyzed every word, convinced myself I owed him a response. Now I just don't care what he has to say. That's growth. Adrian's approval was quiet but real. Or I'm becoming cold. Emma voiced the fear that sometimes crept in during darker moments, shutting down instead of healing. You're not cold. Adrian's certainty was absolute. You cried for an hour last week watching Marcus get his college acceptance letter. You stayed up all night helping Sophia prepare for her scholarship interview. You feel everything intensely. You've just stopped feeling obligated to people who hurt you. That's not cold. That's healthy. Emma wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that the boundaries she'd built weren't walls but necessary protection. Some days it was easier than others. Rebecca called yesterday, Emma said, changing subjects to something less emotionally fraught. Daniel's officially been disbarred. The Illinois State Bar found evidence of multiple ethics violations beyond the financial fraud. Apparently I wasn't the first person he'd manipulated, just the first one willing to come forward with documentation. Adrian's expression hardened. How do you feel about that? Honestly? Emma considered it carefully. Sad for who he could have been if he'd chosen differently. But not guilty. He made choices that had consequences. I just refuse to keep absorbing those consequences for him. That's exactly right. Adrian pulled her close, and Emma let herself lean into his strength, his choices, his consequences. You're not responsible for protecting him from reality. The conversation was interrupted by Emma's phone buzzing, Margaret's name on the screen. I need to take this, Emma said, stepping away to answer. Margaret, hey. Emma, I have news. Margaret's excitement was audible. The Foundation Board just approved a major expansion of our youth programs. We're doubling our capacity and hiring 3 new coordinators, and they want you to be the Director of Youth Services. Emma's breath caught. Director? That's a huge promotion. You've earned it. Margaret's voice was firm. Your programs have the highest success rates, the best retention, and the most community support. Plus, you've demonstrated incredible resilience and leadership over the past few months. The board was unanimous. Director meant more responsibility, longer hours, higher stakes. It also meant better pay, more autonomy, and the ability to shape programs on a larger scale. 3 months ago, Emma would have hesitated, convinced she wasn't ready or qualified or deserving. I accept, Emma said, the words emerging clear and certain. When do I start? Officially next month, but we can begin transition planning immediately. Margaret's satisfaction was evident. Congratulations, Emma. You fought hard for this. After the call ended, Emma stood in the kitchen processing the shift. Director of Youth Services. A title that reflected actual authority, actual respect, actual recognition of her worth. She'd built this through competence and dedication, not through anyone's charity or manipulation. Good news? Adrian asked, reading her expression. Great news! Emma turned to him with a smile that felt genuinely joyful. I just got promoted to Director of Youth Services. Congratulations. Adrian's pride was evident. That's a significant achievement. It is. Emma felt the truth of it settle. And I earned it, not because someone gave me a chance out of pity, but because I'm actually good at what I do. You're exceptional at what you do. Adrian's correction was gentle. Those kids don't trust easily, but they trust you. That's not common. Emma thought about Marcus, who'd recently started college with a full scholarship, about Sophia, who'd gotten into her first choice school and called Emma crying with joy, about James, who'd stopped cutting and started writing poetry, about dozens of other kids whose lives she'd touched in small but meaningful ways. This was what mattered, not Daniel's version of success, money, status, appearance, but actual impact, actual connection, actual meaning. I want to celebrate, Emma said suddenly, properly. Not just dinner at home, but actually go out, be seen, exist in the world as someone who has something worth celebrating. Adrian's expression shifted, something careful entering his eyes. Are you sure? We haven't exactly been public about this. He gestured between them. About us. The observation landed with weight. For 3 months, they'd existed in a bubble, the penthouse, crossroads, carefully controlled spaces where Emma felt safe. But they'd avoided anywhere Daniel might see them, anywhere that might trigger memories, anywhere that required Emma to publicly claim this relationship. I'm sure. Emma's voice was steady. I'm done hiding, done letting fear of running into Daniel dictate where I can exist. I want to go out with you, celebrate this promotion, and not apologize for being happy. "Where do you want to go?" Adrian asked, and Emma appreciated that he didn't question further, just accepted her choice. "Somewhere nice. Somewhere we can dress up and drink good wine and pretend we're normal people having a normal celebration." "We are normal people." Adrian's slight smile held affection, just more complicated than most. That evening, Emma stood in front of the mirror applying makeup with steady hands. The woman looking back was different from the one who'd sat at that table in Aurelius 3 months ago. Stronger, certainly. More self-assured, but also softer in some ways, having learned that vulnerability wasn't weakness when shared with someone who respected it. She'd chosen a dress Daniel would have hated, too bold, too attention-seeking, too unapologetically her. The deep emerald green made her skin glow and her eyes bright. She looked powerful, beautiful, alive. "You're stunning." Adrian appeared in the doorway, dressed in dark slacks and a crisp white shirt that somehow made him look even more dangerous than usual. "You clean up well yourself." Emma turned to face him fully. "Ready? Are you?" The question carried weight. "We could still stay in if you're having second thoughts." "No second thoughts." Emma picked up her clutch, feeling certainty settle over her. "I'm ready to stop living like I'm still being hunted." The restaurant Adrian chose was upscale but warm, the kind of place where people went to celebrate rather than be seen. They were seated at a quiet corner table with a view of the city lights, and Emma felt herself relax into the evening. "To new beginnings," Adrian said, raising his wine glass. "To choosing ourselves," Emma countered, and they both drank to the toast. Dinner was easy, conversation flowing naturally between updates on Adrian's legitimate security consulting work. He'd been slowly shifting away from the morally gray jobs toward helping abuse survivors like his New York client, and Emma's plans for the expanded youth programs. They talked about Marcus's upcoming move to campus, about Sophia's scholarship, about the Foundation's vision for community impact. It was normal, domestic, exactly what Emma had needed without knowing it. They were halfway through dessert when Emma saw him. Daniel, entering the restaurant with a woman Emma didn't recognize. He looked thinner, harder around the edges, like the past 3 months had carved away his polished exterior to reveal something more desperate underneath. The woman with him was young, beautiful, laughing at something he'd said with the kind of delight Emma remembered performing in the early days. Emma's first instinct was to hide, to make herself small, to avoid confrontation. But Adrian's hand found hers under the table, steady and grounding. "You don't have to engage," Adrian said quietly. "We can leave right now if you want." Emma watched Daniel moving through the restaurant, watched the performance he was putting on for his new audience, watched the familiar patterns she'd once been trapped in playing out with a different victim. "No," Emma said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "I don't need to leave. This is my city too, my right to exist in it." Daniel hadn't seen them yet, was too focused on his date to notice his ex-fiancée sitting 20 feet away. Emma could have kept it that way, could have avoided the confrontation entirely, but something in her had shifted over the past 3 months. She was done making herself invisible to accommodate his comfort. When Daniel finally looked up and their eyes met, Emma saw the moment of recognition, saw shock, then anger, then calculation flash across his face in rapid succession. He said something to his date, then started walking toward their table. "Emma." Daniel's voice carried that familiar mix of charm and condescension. "What a surprise." "Daniel." Emma's tone remained neutral. "Enjoying your evening?" "I am." His gaze flicked to Adrian, recognition dawning. "I see you've moved on. How expedient." The implication was clear, that Emma had been cheating, that her relationship with Adrian proved she'd been the problem all along. It was classic Daniel, rewriting history to make himself the victim. "I left you 3 months ago," Emma said calmly. "What I do with my life now isn't your concern. Still, it does explain some things." Daniel's smile didn't reach his eyes. The sudden departure, the vindictive accusations, the destroyed career, all make sense if you were already involved with someone else. Emma felt Adrian tense beside her, but his hand remained steady on hers. She could handle this, didn't need rescuing or defending, just needed to speak her truth. "I left you because you spent 3 years systematically controlling and diminishing me," Emma said, her voice carrying quiet strength. I met Adrian after I left, and he helped me remember I was worth more than you'd convinced me I deserved. Your career was destroyed by your own choices. The financial fraud, the harassment, the ethics violations. I just refused to keep covering for you. Daniel's mask slipped, revealing the rage underneath. You have no idea what you've cost me. I know exactly what I've cost you. Emma's certainty was absolute. Your partnership, your reputation, your ability to manipulate and control without consequences. But those were never yours to keep if they were built on hurting other people. You think you're better than me? Daniel's voice rose slightly, drawing attention from nearby tables. You're working at a nonprofit for poverty wages, living with a man you barely know, pretending you've somehow won when you've got nothing. I have everything that matters. Emma stood, meeting his eyes directly. I have work I love, kids who trust me, a partner who respects my autonomy, and most importantly, I have myself back. You took 3 years from me, Daniel. You don't get another second. She could see him processing this, searching for the angle that would hurt her, the words that would make her doubt herself. But Emma had spent 3 months building armor that didn't require her to be hard or closed, just certain of her own worth. We're done here, Adrian said quietly, standing beside Emma. His presence wasn't threatening, but it was absolute. Enjoy your dinner, Carter, and maybe think about whether you want to repeat old patterns with your new companion, or actually learn something from what you've lost. The observation hit Daniel visibly. He glanced back at his date, who was watching the confrontation with visible confusion, probably wondering what she'd missed in her own vetting process. This isn't over, Daniel said, but the words lacked conviction. It is. Emma's voice was gentle but final. You just haven't accepted it yet. But that's your problem, not mine. I'm done carrying your emotional weight. She walked away without waiting for his response, Adrian's hand finding the small of her back as they navigated through the restaurant. Emma felt eyes following them, heard the whispers starting, knew this encounter would become gossip. But for the first time, she didn't care. Let people talk. Let Daniel spin whatever narrative he needed to protect his ego. Emma knew the truth, and that was enough. They collected their coats and stepped into the cool night air. Emma was shaking slightly, adrenaline finally catching up to the confrontation. You okay? Adrian asked, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. I'm better than okay. Emma leaned into his warmth. I just faced the person who terrorized me for 3 years and I didn't apologize, didn't shrink, didn't doubt myself. I told the truth and walked away. You were magnificent. Adrian's pride was evident. Calm, clear, absolutely in control. He tried every manipulation in his playbook, and none of it landed. Because I'm not the same person he was manipulating. Emma felt the truth of it settle deep. I've spent 3 months remembering who I am outside his distortions. He can't gaslight someone who trusts their own reality. They walked through the city, neither in a hurry to return home. The night was clear and cool, the streets alive with people living their own complicated lives. Emma felt herself expanding into the space around her, no longer constantly monitoring and adjusting to accommodate someone else's mood. I want to talk about something, Emma said as they crossed into a small park. About us, and what this actually is. Adrian's expression shifted to careful attention. Okay. I love you. The words emerged clear and certain. Not the desperate, dependent love I mistook for real with Daniel. Not the kind that requires me to be smaller or different, but the kind that makes me more myself. The kind that feels like partnership instead of possession. Adrian stopped walking, turning to face her fully. Emma, let me finish. Emma's voice was steady. I know it's only been 3 months. I know I'm supposed to take more time healing before jumping into another relationship. I know all the logical reasons why this might be too fast or complicated or risky. But I also know what I feel, and I trust that feeling now. I trust myself. I love you too. Adrian's admission was rough, vulnerable. I have since the night you chose to leave with me instead of staying in a situation that was killing you slowly. I've been terrified to say it because I didn't want to pressure you or rush your healing or become another man trying to shape your choices. You're not another man. Emma moved closer. You're the first person who's ever made me feel like an equal partner instead of a project to be managed. You challenge me to grow instead of shrink. You make space for me instead of demanding I fit into spaces you've defined. I'm trying. Adrian's honesty was cutting. I still make mistakes. Still slip into controlling behavior sometimes because that's what I know. Still have to consciously check myself before offering opinions you didn't ask for. But you do check yourself. Emma took his hands. You notice, you course correct, you apologize when you overstep. That's the difference. Daniel never questioned whether he had the right to control me. You question yourself constantly. What do you want, Emma? Adrian asked softly. What does this look like going forward? Emma thought about it, not rushing to answer just because someone had asked a question, taking time to consult her own desires instead of performing whatever response seemed expected. I want to wake up next to you and know I chose it. Emma's voice was certain. I want to build a life together where we both keep growing instead of one of us shrinking. I want to fight sometimes and fix it because we're both committed to being better. I want messy and complicated and real instead of perfect and controlled and fake. I want that too. Adrian pulled her close. But I need you to know, if I ever start behaving like Daniel, if you ever feel yourself disappearing again, you tell me immediately. And if I can't fix it, you leave. Promise me. I promise. Emma's vow was absolute. And same goes for you. If I become dependent or manipulative or lose myself trying to keep you, you call it out. We both stay honest or we don't stay together. Deal. Adrian kissed her, and Emma felt the promise in it. Not forever guaranteed, but chosen daily. Not perfect certainty, but honest effort. They walked home through the city that had witnessed Emma's destruction and rebuilding, past the restaurant where everything had started, past the places she'd avoided for months, reclaiming every street and corner as hers again. Not defined by Daniel's presence or absence, but simply existing as herself in space she had every right to occupy. The next few weeks passed in a blur of positive momentum. Emma officially started as Director of Youth Services, throwing herself into program expansion with renewed energy. Marcus came home for a weekend visit and told Emma she'd saved his life. Not dramatically, but a simple fact. Sophia sent photos from her college orientation, her smile bright and certain. Daniel's new relationship imploded publicly when the woman discovered his patterns and left with her own scathing social media post about emotional abuse. Emma felt sympathy for her, but no responsibility. She'd tried to warn him through her own departure. What he chose to do with that warning was his business. Adrian's security firm shifted almost entirely to legitimate work helping abuse survivors and trafficking victims, using his morally gray past to navigate systems that often failed the vulnerable. He still traveled sometimes, still faced danger occasionally, but Emma had learned to trust he'd come home, trust that he valued his life enough to be careful with it. They fought sometimes, real fights about real things, not the one-sided battles Emma had endured with Daniel. Fights about Adrian being overprotective, about Emma not asking for help when she needed it, about whose turn it was to grocery shop, and whether the dishwasher should be loaded a specific way. Normal relationship friction that they worked through with communication instead of manipulation. 6 months after that night at Aurelius, Emma woke up on a Saturday morning feeling genuinely happy. Not performing happiness or convincing herself she should be happy, but actually experiencing joy that came from deep alignment between who she was and how she was living. Good morning. Adrian appeared with coffee, settling beside her in bed. Sleep well? Amazingly well. Emma accepted the coffee gratefully. No nightmares, no anxiety, just actual rest. That's progress. Adrian's approval was quiet. You've been sleeping better generally. Because I finally feel safe. Emma sipped her coffee. Actually safe, not just avoiding immediate danger. Safe enough to let my guard down. I'm glad. Adrian's voice carried weight. You deserve to feel safe. They spent the morning in comfortable domesticity, Adrian working on client files while Emma planned the upcoming week's programming. Around noon, Emma's phone rang with an unfamiliar number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Emma Bennett? An official-sounding voice. Speaking. This is Detective Sarah Martinez with Chicago PD. I'm calling about Daniel Carter. We've arrested him for violating a restraining order filed by Jennifer Walsh. That's his most recent ex-partner. She mentioned you might have relevant information about his pattern of behavior. Emma's pulse quickened. What kind of information? Ms. Walsh has documented extensive harassment and threats since she left him 3 weeks ago. Similar to what you experienced, according to her statement. We're building a case and wondered if you'd be willing to provide testimony about his previous behavior. Emma thought about it carefully. Testifying meant reliving parts of her relationship she'd worked hard to move past. Meant facing Daniel again, probably in court, definitely in depositions. Meant potentially having her private pain become public record. But it also meant protecting someone else. Meant establishing a pattern that could stop Daniel from hurting future victims. Meant using her voice to create consequences that might finally force him to change, or at least limit his ability to harm others. "I'll testify," Emma said. "Whatever you need." After the call ended, Adrian looked at her questioningly. "Daniel violated a restraining order against his new ex," Emma explained. "They want my testimony about his pattern of harassment and control." "That's a big decision." Adrian's voice was neutral. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" "I'm sure." Emma felt certainty settle over her. Jennifer tried to leave him just like I did. She deserves support just like I got from you and Rebecca and Margaret. If my testimony helps protect her or stops him from doing this to someone else, it's worth the discomfort. Then I'll be with you through every deposition, every hearing, every moment you need support. Adrian's promise was absolute. The legal process unfolded over the next 2 months. Emma gave detailed testimony about Daniel's financial control, emotional manipulation, and harassment campaign after she left. Other women came forward too. Colleagues who'd experienced his rage when they rejected his advances, an ex-girlfriend from college who'd been too afraid to speak up before, a former assistant who'd quit rather than continue enduring his verbal abuse. The pattern was undeniable. Daniel Carter wasn't an isolated case of relationship gone wrong. He was a serial abuser who'd been protected by charm, status, and victims too afraid or ashamed to come forward. The restraining order was made permanent. The district attorney filed additional charges of harassment and stalking. Daniel's law license, already suspended, was permanently revoked. And most importantly, Jennifer Walsh got the legal protection and support she needed to fully separate from someone who'd been terrorizing her. "Thank you," Jennifer said when they met briefly at the courthouse, "for being willing to testify, for not being ashamed, for showing me that leaving was possible." "You left on your own strength," Emma corrected gently. "I just helped document that the person terrorizing you has a history. Your courage in reporting him is what matters." Still, Jennifer's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "It helps to know I'm not crazy, that his behavior wasn't normal or acceptable, that other people saw it too." Emma hugged her, remembering the isolation of thinking she was the only one who saw Daniel's true nature. "You're not crazy, you're brave, and you're going to be okay." When Emma left the courthouse that day, Adrian waiting by the car, she felt something shift. The last chains connecting her to Daniel had been severed. Not just legally, she'd done that months ago with the cease and desist, but emotionally. She'd faced him, told her truth, and helped protect someone else. That chapter was finally, completely closed. "How do you feel?" Adrian asked as they drove home. "Free." Emma's smile was genuine. "Actually, truly free. Not just surviving or coping, but fully released from every hold he had on me." "Good." Adrian's hand found hers. "You've earned that freedom." That evening, Emma stood on the penthouse balcony watching the sunset over Chicago. The city spread below in all its complicated beauty, dangerous and safe, isolating and connected, capable of destroying people and helping them rebuild. She'd been all of those things in the past 6 months, destroyed and rebuilt, isolated and connected, lost and found. And through it all, she'd learned that the water she'd been drowning in had never been as deep as she'd believed. She just needed to remember she could stand. "Come inside," Adrian called from the kitchen. "Dinner's ready." Emma turned to find him setting the table they now shared, domestic and dangerous in equal measure. Her partner, her choice, her equal. Not perfect, not simple, but real in a way that honored who they both were. "I love you," Emma said, the words easy now. Natural. "I love you too." Adrian's smile was soft. "Now come eat before it gets cold." Emma walked inside, closing the balcony door on the city that held both her worst memories and her new beginning. Tomorrow she'd wake up and go to work making a difference in kids' lives. Tomorrow Adrian would handle whatever morally gray situation needed his particular skills. Tomorrow they'd navigate the complications of building a life together while maintaining their individual identities. But tonight, they'd have dinner and talk about nothing important and fall asleep tangled together. Two people who'd both learned hard lessons about power and were committed to using those lessons to be better. Emma had spent 3 years being diminished, told she was too much or not enough, convinced she needed fixing. Then she'd spent 6 months remembering who she was underneath all those lies. And now she was building something new, not despite her scars, but incorporating them into a foundation that was stronger for having been tested. She wasn't the same woman who'd sat at that table in Aurelius, shrinking under Daniel's criticism. But she also wasn't trying to be someone completely different. She was just Emma, flawed and strong, damaged and healing, choosing herself every single day. And that she'd learned was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The city glittered beyond the windows, indifferent to one woman's journey from drowning to breathing. But Emma noticed it now, appreciated the beauty instead of just surviving through it. She'd reclaimed her life, her voice, her right to exist without apologizing. Some people might say she'd simply traded one man for another. They'd be wrong. She'd traded control for partnership, manipulation for honesty, shrinking for growing. She'd stopped drowning and started swimming, found someone who taught her the water wasn't as deep as she'd believed. Most importantly, she'd learned that the person who saved her wasn't Adrian. It was herself. Adrian had just offered a hand when she was finally ready to take it. But the choice to grab that hand, to leave, to fight, to rebuild, that had been all Emma. Her strength, her courage, her refusal to disappear despite 3 years of someone trying to erase her. As Emma curled up beside Adrian that night, safe and chosen and whole, she thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago. That woman had been terrified to leave, convinced she couldn't survive alone, certain she deserved the treatment she was enduring. Emma wished she could go back and tell that woman what was waiting on the other side of fear. Tell her that drowning in shallow water was ridiculous when you were perfectly capable of standing. Tell her that leaving would be the hardest and best thing she'd ever do. But she couldn't go back, could only go forward carrying the lessons she'd learned and using them to make sure other women, like Jennifer, like the kids at Crossroads, like anyone drowning in water they didn't realize was shallow, knew they had choices, that they were worth saving, that the water wasn't as deep as they thought. Emma fell asleep with that knowledge settled warm in her chest. Not just survived, but thriving. Not just escaped, but flourishing. Not just breathing, but truly, completely alive. And in the morning, she'd wake up and choose it all over again. Choose herself, choose growth, choose the messy, complicated, beautiful reality of a life built on honesty instead of control. Because that's what freedom actually meant. Not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of choice. And Emma had finally, fully claimed her right to choose. She'd stood up in shallow water and remembered how to breathe. And she was never going under again.